Chapter 40.
"And what sort of persons do you expect to breakfast?" said Beauchamp. "A gentleman and a diplomatist." "Then we shall have to wait 2 hours for the gentleman and 3 for the diplomatist. I shall come back to dessert. Keep me some strawberries, coffee, and cigars. I shall take a cutlet on my way to the chamber." "Do not do anything of the sort, for were the gentleman a Montmorency and the diplomatist a Metternich, we will breakfast at 11. In the meantime, follow Debre's example and take a glass of sherry and a biscuit." "Be it so. I will stay. I must do something to distract my thoughts." "You are like Debre, and yet it seems to me that when the minister is out of spirits, the opposition ought to be joyous. Ah, you do not know with what I am threatened. I shall hear this morning that M. Danglars make a speech at the Chamber of Deputies, and at his wife's this evening I shall hear the tragedy of a peer of France. The devil take the constitutional government, and since we had our choice, as they say at least, how could we choose that? I understand. You must lay in a stock of hilarity." "Do not run down M. Danglars' speeches," said Debre. "He votes for you, for he belongs to the opposition. Pardieu, that is exactly the worst of all. I am waiting until you send him to speak at the Luxembourg, to laugh at my ease." "My dear friend," said Albert to Beauchamp, "it is plain that the affairs of Spain are settled, for you are most desperately out of humor this morning. Recollect that Parisian gossip has spoken of a marriage between myself and Emile Huguenot Danglars. I cannot in conscience, therefore, let you run down the speeches of a man who will one day say to me, 'Vicomte, you know I give my daughter 2 millions. "Ah, this marriage will never take place," said Beauchamp. "The king has made him a baron and can make him a peer, but he cannot make him a gentleman, and the Count of Morcerf is too aristocratic to consent, for the paltry sum of 2,000,000 francs, to a M. Salience. The Viscount of Morcerf can only wed a marchioness. But 2,000,000 francs make a nice little sum," replied Morcerf. "It is the social capital of a theater on the boulevard, or a railroad from the Jardin des Plantes to La RPE. "Never mind what he says, Morcerf," said Debre. "Do you marry her? You marry a money-bag label, it is true. Well, but what does that matter? It is better to have a blazon less and a figure more on it. You have 7 martlets on your arms. Give 3 to your wife and you will still have 4. That is 1 more than M. de Guise had, who so nearly became King of France, and whose cousin was Emperor of Germany." "On my word, I think you are right, Lucien," said Albert absently. "To be sure. Besides, every millionaire is as noble as a bastard, that is, he can be." "Do not say that, Debre," returned Beauchamp, laughing, "for here is C.H. Tournaud, who, to cure you of your mania for paradoxes, will pass the sword of Renaud de Montauban, his ancestor, through your body." "He will sully it then," returned Lucien, "for I am low, very low." "Oh, heavens!" cried Beauchamp, "the minister quotes B. Ranger. What shall we come to next?" "M. de Ch. Tournaud M. Maximilian Morel," said the servant, announcing 2 fresh guests. "Now then to breakfast," said Beauchamp, "for, if I remember, you told me you only expected 2 persons, Albert." "Morel," muttered Albert. "Morel, who is he?" But before he had finished, M. de Ch. Tournaud, a handsome young man of 30, gentleman all over, that is, with the figure of a Gitch and the wit of a Mortemart, took Albert's hand. "My dear Albert," said he, "let me introduce to you M. Maximilian Morel, captain of Spahis, my friend, and what is more, however the man speaks for himself, my preserver. Salute my hero, Viscount." And he stepped on one side to give place to a young man of refined and dignified bearing, with large and open brow, piercing eyes, and black mustache, whom our readers have already seen at Marseilles, under circumstances sufficiently dramatic not to be forgotten. A rich uniform, half French, half Oriental, set off his graceful and stalwart figure, and his broad chest was decorated with the Order of the Legion of Honor. The young officer bowed with easy and elegant politeness. "Monsieur," said Albert with affectionate courtesy, "the Count of Ch. Tournaud knew how much pleasure this introduction would give me. You are his friend, be ours also." "Well said," interrupted C.H. Torenaud, "and pray that, if you should ever be in a similar predicament, he may do as much for you as he did for me." "What has he done?" asked Albert. "Oh, nothing worth speaking of," said Morel. "M. de C.H. Torenaud exaggerates. Not worth speaking of." Cried C.H. Torenaud, "Life is not worth speaking of. That is rather too philosophical, on my word, Morel. It is very well for you, who risk your life every day, but for me, who only did so once, we gather from all this, Baron, that Captain Morel saved your life." "Exactly so. On what occasion?" asked Beauchamp. "Beauchamp, my good fellow, you know I am starving," said Debray. "Do not set him off on some long story." "Well, I do not prevent your sitting down to table," replied Beauchamp. "C.H. Torenaud can tell us while we eat our breakfast." "Gentlemen," said Morcerf, "it is only 10:15, and I expect someone else." "Ah, true, a diplomatist," observed Debray. "Diplomat or not, I don't know. I only know that he charged himself on my account with a mission, which he terminated so entirely to my satisfaction, that had I been king, I should have instantly created him knight of all my orders, even had I been able to offer him the golden fleece and the garter." "Well, since we are not to sit down to table," said Debray, "take a glass of sherry, and tell us all about it. You all know that I had the fancy of going to Africa. It is a road your ancestors have traced for you," said Albert gallantly. "Yes, but I doubt that your object was like theirs, to rescue the Holy Sepulchre." "You are quite right, Beauchamp," observed the young aristocrat. "It was only to fight as an amateur. I cannot bear dueling ever since 2 seconds, whom I had chosen to arrange an affair, forced me to break the arm of one of my best friends, one whom you all know, poor France de Pinay." "Ah, true," said Debray, "you did fight some time ago. About what?" "The devil take me, if I remember," returned C.H. Torenaud. "But I recollect perfectly one thing, that, being unwilling to let such talents as mine sleep, I wished to try upon the Arabs the new pistols that had been given to me. In consequence I embarked for Oran, and went from thence to Constantine, where I arrived just in time to witness the raising of the siege. I retreated with the rest for 40 hours. I endured the rain during the day, and the cold during the night tolerably well, but the third morning my horse died of cold. Poor brute, accustomed to be covered up and to have a stove in the stable, the Arabian finds himself unable to bear 10 degrees of cold in Arabia." "That's why you want to purchase my English horse," said Debray. "You think he will bear the cold better. You are mistaken, for I have made a vow never to return to Africa. You were very much frightened then?" asked Beauchamp. "Well, yes, and I had good reason to be so," replied C.H. Torenaud. "I was retreating on foot, for my horse was dead. 6 Arabs came up full gallop to cut off my head. I shot 2 with my double-barreled gun and 2 more with my pistols, but I was then disarmed, and 2 were still left. One seized me by the hair, that is why I now wear it so short, for no one knows what may happen. The other swung a yataghan, and I already felt the cold steel on my neck, when this gentleman whom you see here charged them, shot the one who held me by the hair, and cleft the skull of the other with his saber. He had assigned himself the task of saving a man's life that day. Chance caused that man to be myself. When I am rich, I will order a statue of Chance from Clagman or Marichetti." "Yes," said Morel, smiling, "it was the 5th of September, the anniversary of the day on which my father was miraculously preserved. Therefore, as far as it lies in my power, I endeavor to celebrate it by some heroic action," interrupted C.H. Torenaud. "I was chosen. But that is not all. After rescuing me from the sword, he rescued me from the cold, not by sharing his cloak with me like St. Martin, but by giving me the whole. Then from hunger by sharing with me, guess what?" "A Strasbourg pie?" asked Beauchamp. "No, his horse, of which we each of us ate a slice with a hearty appetite. It was very hard, the horse," said Morcerf, laughing. "No, the sacrifice," returned C.H. Torenaud. "Ask Debray if he would sacrifice his English steed for a stranger. Not for a stranger, said Debray, but for a friend I might, perhaps. I divined that you would become mine, Count, replied Morel. Besides, as I had the honor to tell you, heroism or not, sacrifice or not, that day I owed an offering to bad fortune in recompense for the favors good fortune had on other days granted to us. The history to which M. Morel alludes, continued C.H. Torenaud, is an admirable one which he will tell you some day when you are better acquainted with him. Today let us fill our stomachs and not our memories. What time do you breakfast, Albert? At 10:30. Precisely, asked Debray, taking out his watch. Oh, you will give me 5 minutes grace, replied Morcerf, for I also expect a preserver. Of whom? Of myself, cried Morcerf. Parbleu! Do you think I cannot be saved as well as anyone else, and that there are only Arabs who cut off heads? Our breakfast is a philanthropic one, and we shall have at table at least, I hope so, 2 benefactors of humanity. What shall we do? Said Debray. We have only 1 Montheian prize. Well, it will be given to someone who has done nothing to deserve it, said Beauchamp. That is the way the Academy mostly escapes from the dilemma. And where does he come from? Asked Debray. You have already answered the question once, but so vaguely that I venture to put it a second time. Really, said Albert, I do not know. When I invited him 3 months ago, he was then at Rome, but since that time who knows where he may have gone? And you think him capable of being exact? Demanded Debray. I think him capable of everything. Well, with the 5 minutes grace, we have only 10 left. I will profit by them to tell you something about my guest. I beg pardon, interrupted Beauchamp. Are there any materials for an article in what you are going to tell us? Yes, and for a most curious one. Go on then, for I see I shall not get to the chamber this morning, and I must make up for it. I was at Rome during the last carnival. We know that, said Beauchamp. Yes, but what you do not know is that I was carried off by bandits. There are no bandits, cried Debray. Yes, there are, and most hideous, or rather most admirable ones, for I found them ugly enough to frighten me. Come, my dear Albert, said Debray, confess that your cook is behindhand, that the oysters have not arrived from Ostend or Marennes, and that, like Madame de Maintenon, you are going to replace the dish by a story. Say so at once. We are sufficiently well bred to excuse you and to listen to your history, fabulous as it promises to be. And I say to you, fabulous as it may seem, I tell it as a true one from beginning to end. The brigands had carried me off and conducted me to a gloomy spot called the Catacombs of Saint Sebastian. I know it, said C.H. Torenaud. I narrowly escaped catching a fever there. And I did more than that, replied Morcerf, for I caught one. I was informed that I was prisoner until I paid the sum of 4,000 Roman crowns, about 24,000 francs. Unfortunately, I had not above 1,500. I was at the end of my journey and of my credit. I wrote to France, and were he here he would confirm every word I wrote then to France, that if he did not come with the 4,000 crowns before 6, at 10 minutes past, I should have gone to join the blessed saints and glorious martyrs in whose company I had the honor of being. And Signor Luigi Vampa, such was the name of the chief of these bandits, would have scrupulously kept his word. But France did come with the 4,000 crowns, said C.H. Torenaud. A man whose name is France de Pinay or Albert de Morcerf has not much difficulty in procuring them. No, he arrived accompanied simply by the guest I am going to present to you. Ah, this gentleman is a Hercules killing Cacus, a Perseus freeing Andromeda. No, he is a man about my own size, armed to the teeth. He had not even a knitting needle, but he paid your ransom. He said 2 words to the chief and I was free. And they apologized to him for having carried you off, said Beauchamp. Just so. Why, he is a second Ariosto. No, his name is the Count of Monte Cristo. There is no Count of Monte Cristo, said Debray. I do not think so, added C.H. Torenaud, with the air of a man who knows the whole of the European nobility perfectly. Does anyone know anything of a Count of Monte Cristo? He comes possibly from the Holy Land, and one of his ancestors possessed Calvary, as the Mortemarts did the Dead Sea. I think I can assist your researches, said Maximilian. Monte Cristo is a little island I have often heard spoken of by the old sailors. My father employed a grain of sand in the center of the Mediterranean, an atom in the infinite. Precisely, cried Albert. Well, he of whom I speak is the lord and master of this grain of sand, of this atom. He has purchased the title of Count somewhere in Tuscany. He is rich, then. I believe so, but that ought to be visible. That is what deceives you, Debray. I do not understand you. Have you read the Arabian Nights? What a question. Well, do you know if the persons you see there are rich or poor, if their sacks of wheat are not rubies or diamonds? They seem like poor fishermen, and suddenly they open some mysterious cavern filled with the wealth of the Indies, which means that my Count of Monte Cristo is one of those fishermen. He has even a name taken from the book, since he calls himself Sinbad the Sailor, and has a cave filled with gold. And you have seen this cavern, Morcerf? Asked Beauchamp. No, but France has. For heaven's sake, not a word of this before him. France went in with his eyes blindfolded, and was waited on by mutes and by women to whom Cleopatra was a painted strumpet. Only he is not quite sure about the women, for they did not come in until after he had taken hashish, so that what he took for women might have been simply a row of statues. The two young men looked at Morcerf as if to say, "Are you mad, or are you laughing at us?" And I also, said Morrel thoughtfully, have heard something like this from an old sailor named Penelon. Ah, cried Albert, it is very lucky that M. Morrel comes to aid me. You are vexed, are you not, that he thus gives a clue to the labyrinth? My dear Albert, said Debray, what you tell us is so extraordinary. Ah, because your ambassadors and your consuls do not tell you of them, they have no time. They are too much taken up with interfering in the affairs of their countrymen who travel. Now you get angry and attack our poor agents. How will you have them protect you? The Chamber cuts down their salaries every day, so that now they have scarcely any. Will you be ambassador, Albert? I will send you to Constantinople. No, lest on the first demonstration I make in favor of Mehemet Ali, the Sultan send me the bowstring and make my secretaries strangle me. You say very true, responded Debray. Yes, said Albert, but this has nothing to do with the existence of the Count of Monte Cristo. Pardieu, everyone exists. Doubtless, but not in the same way. Everyone has not black slaves, a princely retinue, an arsenal of weapons that would do credit to an Arabian fortress, horses that cost 6,000 francs apiece, and Greek mistresses. Have you seen the Greek mistress? I have both seen and heard her. I saw her at the theater and heard her one morning when I breakfasted with the Count. He eats then, yes, but so little it can hardly be called eating. He must be a vampire. Laugh if you will. The Countess G., who knew Lord Ruthven, declared that the Count was a vampire. Ah, capital, said Beauchamp. For a man not connected with newspapers, here is the pendant to the famous sea serpent of the Constitutional. Wild eyes, the iris of which contracts or dilates at pleasure, said Debray. Facial angle strongly developed. Magnificent forehead, livid complexion, black beard, sharp and white teeth, politeness unexceptionable. Just so, Lucien, returned Morcerf. You have described him feature for feature. Yes, keen and cutting politeness. This man has often made me shudder, and one day when we were viewing an execution, I thought I should faint, more from hearing the cold and calm manner in which he spoke of every description of torture, than from the sight of the executioner and the culprit. Did he not conduct you to the ruins of the Colosseum and suck your blood? Asked Beauchamp. Or, having delivered you, make you sign a flaming parchment, surrendering your soul to him as Esau did his birthright? Rail on at your ease, gentlemen, said Morcerf, somewhat piqued. When I look at you Parisians, idlers on the Boulevard de Gaulle or the Bois de Boulogne, and think of this man, it seems to me we are not of the same race. I am highly flattered, returned Beauchamp. At the same time, added Renaud, your Count of Monte Cristo is a very fine fellow, always accepting his little arrangements with the Italian banditti. There are no Italian banditti, said Debray. No vampire, cried Beauchamp. No Count of Monte Cristo, added Debray. There is 10:30 striking, Albert. Confess you have dreamed this, and let us sit down to breakfast, continued Beauchamp. But the sound of the clock had not died away when Germain announced, His Excellency the Count of Monte Cristo. The involuntary start everyone gave proved how much Morcerf's narrative had impressed them, and Albert himself could not wholly refrain from manifesting sudden emotion. He had not heard a carriage stop in the street, or steps in the antechamber. The door had itself opened noiselessly. The Count appeared, dressed with the greatest simplicity, but the most fastidious dandy could have found nothing to cavil at in his toilet. Every article of dress, hat, coat, gloves, and boots was from the first makers. He seemed scarcely 35, but what struck everybody was his extreme resemblance to the portrait Debray had drawn. The Count advanced, smiling, into the center of the room, and approached Albert, who hastened towards him holding out his hand in a ceremonial manner. Punctuality, said Monte Cristo, is the politeness of kings, according to one of your sovereigns, I think, but it is not the same with travelers. However, I hope you will excuse the 2 or 3 seconds I am behindhand. 500 leagues are not to be accomplished without some trouble, and especially in France, where, it seems, it is forbidden to beat the postilions. My dear Count, replied Albert, I was announcing your visit to some of my friends, whom I had invited in consequence of the promise you did me the honor to make, and whom I now present to you. They are the Count of Renaud, whose nobility goes back to the 12 peers, and whose ancestors had a place at the Round Table, M. Lucien Debray, private secretary to the Minister of the Interior, M. Beauchamp, an editor of a paper and the terror of the French government, but of whom, in spite of his national celebrity, you perhaps have not heard in Italy, since his paper is prohibited there, and M. Maximilian Morel, captain of Spahis. At this name the Count, who had hitherto saluted everyone with courtesy, but at the same time with coldness and formality, stepped a pace forward, and a slight tinge of red colored his pale cheeks. You wear the uniform of the new French conquerors, monsieur, said he. It is a handsome uniform. No one could have said what caused the Count's voice to vibrate so deeply, and what made his eye flash, which was in general so clear, lustrous, and limpid when he pleased. You have never seen our Africans, Count, said Albert. Never, replied the Count, who was by this time perfectly master of himself again. Well, beneath this uniform beats one of the bravest and noblest hearts in the whole army. O. M. De Morcerf, interrupted Morel. Let me go on, Captain. And we have just heard, continued Albert, of a new deed of his, and so heroic a one, that, although I have seen him today for the first time, I request you to allow me to introduce him as my friend. At these words it was still possible to observe in Monte Cristo the concentrated look, changing color, and slight trembling of the eyelid that show emotion. Ah, you have a noble heart, said the Count. So much the better. This exclamation, which corresponded to the Count's own thought rather than to what Albert was saying, surprised everybody, and especially Morel, who looked at Monte Cristo with wonder. But at the same time the intonation was so soft that, however strange the speech might seem, it was impossible to be offended at it. Why should he doubt it? Said Beauchamp to Renaud. In reality, replied the latter, who, with his aristocratic glance and his knowledge of the world, had penetrated at once all that was penetrable in Monte Cristo, Albert has not deceived us, for the Count is a most singular being. What say you, Morel? Ma foi, he has an open look about him that pleases me, in spite of the singular remark he has made about me. Gentlemen, said Albert, Germain informs me that breakfast is ready. My dear Count, allow me to show you the way. They passed silently into the breakfast room, and everyone took his place. Gentlemen, said the Count, seating himself, permit me to make a confession which must form my excuse for any improprieties I may commit. I am a stranger, and a stranger to such a degree, that this is the first time I have ever been at Paris. The French way of living is utterly unknown to me, and up to the present time I have followed the Eastern customs, which are entirely in contrast to the Parisian. I beg you, therefore, to excuse if you find anything in me too Turkish, too Italian, or too Arabian. Now then, let us breakfast. With what an air he says all this, muttered Beauchamp. Decidedly he is a great man. A great man in his own country, added Debray. A great man in every country, M. Debray, said Châteaurenaud. The Count was, it may be remembered, a most temperate guest. Albert remarked this, expressing his fears lest, at the outset, the Parisian mode of life should displease the traveler in the most essential point. My dear Count, said he, I fear one thing, and that is, that the fare of the Rue du Helder is not so much to your taste as that of the Piazza di Spagna. I ought to have consulted you on the point, and have had some dishes prepared expressly. Did you know me better, returned the Count, smiling, you would not give one thought of such a thing for a traveler like myself, who has successively lived on macaroni at Naples, polenta at Milan, alla podrida at Valencia, pilau at Constantinople, curry in India, and swallows' nests in China. I eat everywhere and of everything, only I eat but little. And today, that you reproach me with my want of appetite, is my day of appetite, for I have not eaten since yesterday morning. What, cried all the guests, you have not eaten for 24 hours? No, replied the Count. I was forced to go out of my road to obtain some information near Enmies, so that I was somewhat late, and therefore I did not choose to stop. And you ate in your carriage? Asked Morcerf. No, I slept, as I generally do when I am weary without having the courage to amuse myself, or when I am hungry without feeling inclined to eat. But you can sleep when you please, monsieur, said Morrel. Yes, you have a recipe for it, an infallible one. That would be invaluable to us in Africa, who have not always any food to eat and rarely anything to drink. Yes, said Monte Cristo, but unfortunately, a recipe excellent for a man like myself would be very dangerous applied to an army, which might not awake when it was needed. May we inquire what is this recipe? Asked Debray. Oh yes, returned Monte Cristo, I make no secret of it. It is a mixture of excellent opium, which I fetch myself from Canton in order to have it pure, and the best hashish which grows in the East, that is, between the Tigris and the Euphrates. These two ingredients are mixed in equal proportions and formed into pills. 10 minutes after one is taken, the effect is produced. Ask Baron Franz de Pinay, I think he tasted them one day. Yes, replied Morcerf, he said something about it to me. But said Beauchamp, who, as became a journalist, was very incredulous, you always carry this drug about you. Always. Would it be an indiscretion to ask to see those precious pills? Continued Beauchamp, hopping to take him at a disadvantage. No, monsieur, returned the Count, and he drew from his pocket a marvelous casket, formed out of a single emerald and closed by a golden lid which unscrewed and gave passage to a small greenish-colored pellet about the size of a pea. This ball had an acrid and penetrating odor. There were 4 or 5 more in the emerald, which would contain about a dozen. The casket passed around the table, but it was more to examine the admirable emerald than to see the pills that it passed from hand to hand. And is it your cook who prepares these pills? Asked Beauchamp. Oh no, monsieur, replied Monte Cristo, I do not thus betray my enjoyments to the vulgar. I am a tolerable chemist and prepare my pills myself. This is a magnificent emerald and the largest I have ever seen, said Châteaurenaud, although my mother has some remarkable family jewels. I had 3 similar ones, returned Monte Cristo. I gave one to the Sultan, who mounted it in his saber, another to our Holy Father the Pope, who had it set in his tiara, opposite to one nearly as large, though not so fine, given by the Emperor Napoleon to his predecessor, Pius VII. I kept the third for myself, and I had it hollowed out, which reduced its value, but rendered it more commodious for the purpose I intended. Everyone looked at Monte Cristo with astonishment. He spoke with so much simplicity that it was evident he spoke the truth, or that he was mad. However, the sight of the emerald made them naturally inclined to the former belief. "And what did these two sovereigns give you in exchange for these magnificent presents?" asked Debray. "The Sultan, the liberty of a woman," replied the Count. "The Pope, the life of a man, so that once in my life I have been as powerful as if heaven had brought me into the world on the steps of a throne." "And it was Peppino you saved, was it not?" cried Morcerf. "It was for him that you obtained pardon." "Perhaps," returned the Count, smiling. "My dear Count, you have no idea what pleasure it gives me to hear you speak thus," said Morcerf. "I had announced you beforehand to my friends as an enchanter of the Arabian Nights, a wizard of the Middle Ages. But the Parisians are so subtle in paradoxes that they mistake for caprices of the imagination the most incontestable truths, when these truths do not form a part of their daily existence. For example, here is Debray who reads, and Beauchamp who prints every day. A member of the Jockey Club has been stopped and robbed on the boulevard. 4 persons have been assassinated in the Rue Saint-Denis or the Faubourg Saint-Germain. 10, 15, or 20 thieves have been arrested in a cafe on the Boulevard du Temple or in the Thermes de Julien, and yet these same men deny the existence of the bandits in the Maremma, the Campagna di Romana, or the Pontine Marshes. Tell them yourself that I was taken by bandits, and that without your generous intercession I should now have been sleeping in the catacombs of St. Sebastian, instead of receiving them in my humble abode in the Rue du Helder." "Ah," said Monte Cristo, "you promised me never to mention that circumstance." "It was not I who made that promise," cried Morcerf. "It must have been someone else whom you have rescued in the same manner, and whom you have forgotten. Pray speak of it, for I shall not only, I trust, relate the little I do know, but also a great deal I do not know." "It seems to me," returned the Count, smiling, "that you played a sufficiently important part to know as well as myself what happened. Well, you promise me, if I tell all I know, to relate in your turn all that I do not know." "That is but fair," replied Monte Cristo. "Well," said Morcerf, "for 3 days I believed myself the object of the attentions of a mask, whom I took for a descendant of Tullia or Papa, while I was simply the object of the attentions of a contadina, and I say contadina to avoid saying peasant girl. What I know is that, like a fool, a greater fool than he of whom I spoke just now, I mistook for this peasant girl a young bandit of 15 or 16, with a beardless chin and slim waist, and who, just as I was about to imprint a chaste salute on his lips, placed a pistol to my head, and aided by 7 or 8 others, led, or rather dragged me, to the catacombs of St. Sebastian, where I found a highly educated brigand chief perusing Cæsar's commentaries, and who deigned to leave off reading to inform me that unless the next morning, before 6 o'clock, 4,000 piasters were paid into his account at his banker S, at 6:15 I should have ceased to exist. The letter is still to be seen, for it is in France D. Pinai's possession, signed by me, and with a postscript of M. Luigi Vampa. This is all I know, but I know not, Count, how you contrive to inspire so much respect in the bandits of Rome who ordinarily have so little respect for anything. I assure you, France and I were lost in admiration. Nothing more simple," returned the Count. "I had known the famous Vampa for more than 10 years. When he was quite a child and only a shepherd, I gave him a few gold pieces for showing me my way, and he, in order to repay me, gave me a poniard, the hilt of which he had carved with his own hand, and which you may have seen in my collection of arms. In after years, whether he had forgotten this interchange of presents, which ought to have cemented our friendship, or whether he did not recollect me, he sought to take me, but on the contrary, it was I who captured him and a dozen of his band. I might have handed him over to Roman justice, which is somewhat expeditious, and which would have been particularly so with him, But I did nothing of the sort. I suffered him and his band to depart, with the condition that they should sin no more, said Beauchamp, laughing. I see they kept their promise. No, monsieur, returned Monte Cristo, upon the simple condition that they should respect myself and my friends. Perhaps what I am about to say may seem strange to you, who are socialists, and vaunt humanity and your duty to your neighbor, but I never seek to protect a society which does not protect me, and which, I will even say, generally occupies itself about me only to injure me, and thus, by giving them a low place in my esteem, and preserving a neutrality towards them, it is society and my neighbor who are indebted to me. Bravo, cried C.H. Torrenaud. You are the first man I ever met sufficiently courageous to preach egotism. Bravo, Count, bravo. It is frank at least, said Morrel. But I am sure that the Count does not regret having once deviated from the principles he has so boldly avowed. How have I deviated from those principles, monsieur? Asked Monte Cristo, who could not help looking at Morrel with so much intensity that 2 or 3 times the young man had been unable to sustain that clear and piercing glance. Why, it seems to me, replied Morrel, that in delivering M. de Morcerf, whom you did not know, you did good to your neighbor and to society, of which he is the brightest ornament, said Beauchamp, drinking off a glass of champagne. My dear Count, cried Morcerf, you are at fault, you, one of the most formidable logicians I know, and you must see it clearly proved that instead of being an egotist, you are a philanthropist. Ah, you call yourself Oriental, a Levantan, Maltese, Indian, Chinese. Your family name is Monte Cristo. Sinbad the Sailor is your baptismal appellation, and yet the first day you set foot in Paris, you instinctively display the greatest virtue, or rather the chief defect of us eccentric Parisians. That is, you assume the vices you have not and conceal the virtues you possess. My dear Vicomte, returned Monte Cristo, I do not see, in all I have done, anything that merits, either from you or these gentlemen, the pretended eulogies I have received. You are no stranger to me, for I knew you from the time I gave up 2 rooms to you, invited you to breakfast with me, lent you one of my carriages, witnessed the carnival in your company, and saw with you from a window in the Piazza del Popolo the execution that affected you so much that you nearly fainted. I will appeal to any of these gentlemen, could I leave my guest in the hands of a hideous bandit, as you term him. Besides, you know, I had the idea that you could introduce me into some of the Paris salons when I came to France. You might some time ago have looked upon this resolution as a vague project, but today you see it was a reality, and you must submit to it under penalty of breaking your word. I will keep it, returned Morcerf, but I fear that you will be much disappointed, accustomed as you are to picturesque events and fantastic horizons. Amongst us you will not meet with any of those episodes with which your adventurous existence has so familiarized you. Our Chimborazo is Montmartre, our Himalaya is Mount Valrene, our great desert is the plain of Grenelle, where they are now boring an artesian well to water the caravans. We have plenty of thieves, though not so many as is said, but these thieves stand in far more dread of a policeman than a lord. France is so prosaic, and Paris so civilized a city, that you will not find in its 85 departments, I say 85, because I do not include Corsica, you will not find, then, in these 85 departments, a single hill on which there is not a telegraph, or a grotto in which the commissary of police has not put up a gas lamp. There is but one service I can render you, and for that I place myself entirely at your orders, that is, to present, or make my friends present, you everywhere. Besides, you have no need of anyone to introduce you with your name, and your fortune, and your talent. Monte Cristo bowed with a somewhat ironical smile. You can present yourself everywhere and be well received. I can be useful in one way only if knowledge of Parisian habits, of the means of rendering yourself comfortable, or of the bazaars, can assist. You may depend upon me to find you a fitting dwelling here. I do not dare offer to share my apartments with you, as I shared yours at Rome, I, who do not profess egotism, but am yet egotist par excellence. For, except myself, these rooms would not hold a shadow more, unless that shadow were feminine. Ah, said the Count, that is a most conjugal reservation. I recollect that at Rome you said something of a projected marriage. May I congratulate you? The affair is still in projection. And he who says in projection means already decided, said Debray. No, replied Morcerf, my father is most anxious about it, and I hope, ere long, to introduce you, if not to my wife, at least to my betrothed Mademoiselle Eugne Danglars. Eugne Danglars, said Monte Cristo. Tell me, is not her father Baron Danglars? Yes, returned Morcerf, a baron of a new creation. What matter, said Monte Cristo, if he has rendered the state services which merit this distinction? Enormous ones, answered Beauchamp. Although in reality a liberal, he negotiated a loan of 6 millions for Charles X in 1829, who made him a baron and chevalier of the Legion of Honor, so that he wears the ribbon not, as you would think, in his waistcoat pocket, but at his buttonhole. Ah, interrupted Morcerf, laughing, Beauchamp, keep that for the Corsair or the Charivari, but spare my future father-in-law before me. Then, turning to Monte Cristo, you just now spoke his name as if you knew the Baron. I do not know him, returned Monte Cristo, but I shall probably soon make his acquaintance, for I have a credit opened with him by the house of Richard and Blount, of London, Arstein and Esquels of Vienna, and Thomson and French at Rome. As he pronounced the two last names, the Count glanced at Maximilian Morrel. If the stranger expected to produce an effect on Morrel, he was not mistaken. Maximilian started as if he had been electrified. Thomson and French, said he. Do you know this house, monsieur? They are my bankers in the capital of the Christian world, returned the Count quietly. Can my influence with them be of any service to you? Oh, Count, you could assist me perhaps in researches which have been, up to the present, fruitless. This house in past years did ours a great service, and has, I know not for what reason, always denied having rendered us this service. I shall be at your orders, said Monte Cristo, bowing. But continued Morcerf, propos of Danglars, we have strangely wandered from the subject. We were speaking of a suitable habitation for the Count of Monte Cristo. Come, gentlemen, let us all propose some place. Where shall we lodge this new guest in our great capital? Faubourg Saint-Germain, said C.H. Tourenaud. The Count will find there a charming hotel with a court and garden. Bah! C.H. Tourenaud, returned Debray, you only know your dull and gloomy Faubourg Saint-Germain. Do not pay any attention to him. Count live in the Chausse d'Antin, that's the real center of Paris. Boulevard de l'Opéra, said Beauchamp, the second floor a house with a balcony. The Count will have his cushions of silver cloth brought there, and as he smokes his chibouque, see all Paris pass before him. You have no idea, then, Morrel? Asked Châteaurenaud. You do not propose anything. Oh, yes, returned the young man, smiling. On the contrary, I have one, but I expected the Count would be tempted by one of the brilliant proposals made him. Yet as he has not replied to any of them, I will venture to offer him a suite of apartments in a charming hotel, in the Pompadour style, that my sister has inhabited for a year, in the Rue Meslay. You have a sister? Asked the Count. Yes, monsieur, a most excellent sister. Married, nearly 9 years, happy. Asked the Count again. As happy as it is permitted to a human creature to be, replied Maximilian. She married the man she loved, who remained faithful to us in our fallen fortunes, Emmanuel Herbaut. Monte Cristo smiled imperceptibly. I lived there during my leave of absence, continued Maximilian, and I shall be, together with my brother-in-law Emmanuel, at the disposition of the Count, whenever he thinks fit to honor us. 1 minute, cried Albert, without giving Monte Cristo the time to reply. Take care, you are going to immure a traveler, Sinbad the sailor, a man who comes to see Paris. You are going to make a patriarch of him. Oh no, said Morrel, my sister is 25, My brother-in-law is 30. They are gay, young, and happy. Besides, the Count will be in his own house, and only see them when he thinks fit to do so. Thanks, monsieur, said Monte Cristo. I shall content myself with being presented to your sister and her husband, if you will do me the honor to introduce me. But I cannot accept the offer of any one of these gentlemen, since my habitation is already prepared. What, cried Morcerf, you are then going to a hotel that will be very dull for you. Was I so badly lodged at Rome? Said Monte Cristo, smiling. Parbleu, at Rome you spent 50,000 piasters in furnishing your apartments, but I presume that you are not disposed to spend a similar sum every day. It is not that which deterred me, replied Monte Cristo, but as I determined to have a house to myself, I sent on my valet de chambre, and he ought by this time to have bought the house and furnished it. But you have, then, a valet de chambre who knows Paris, said Beauchamp. It is the first time he has ever been in Paris. He is black and cannot speak, returned Monte Cristo. It is Ali. Cried Albert in the midst of the general surprise. Yes, Ali himself, my Nubian mute whom you saw, I think, at Rome. Certainly, said Morcerf, I recollect him perfectly. But how could you charge a Nubian to purchase a house and a mute to furnish it? He will do everything wrong. Undeceive yourself, monsieur, replied Monte Cristo. I am quite sure that, on the contrary, he will choose everything as I wish. He knows my tastes, my caprices, my wants. He has been here a week, with the instinct of a hound hunting by himself. He will arrange everything for me. He knew that I should arrive today at 10 o'clock. He was waiting for me at 9 at the Barrière de Fontainebleau. He gave me this paper. It contains the number of my new abode. Read it yourself, and Monte Cristo passed a paper to Albert. Ah, that is really original, said Beauchamp. And very princely, added Château-Renaud. What, do you not know your house? Asked Debray. No, said Monte Cristo. I told you I did not wish to be behind my time. I dressed myself in the carriage and descended at the Viscount's door. The young men looked at each other. They did not know if it was a comedy Monte Cristo was playing, but every word he uttered had such an air of simplicity that it was impossible to suppose what he said was false. Besides, why should he tell a falsehood? We must content ourselves, then, said Beauchamp, with rendering the Count all the little services in our power. I, in my quality of journalist, open all the theaters to him. Thanks, monsieur, returned Monte Cristo. My steward has orders to take a box at each theater. Is your steward also a Nubian? Asked Debray. No, he is a countryman of yours, if a Corsican is a countryman of anyone's. But you know him, M. de Morcerf. Is it that excellent M. Bertuccio, who understands hearing windows so well? Yes, you saw him the day I had the honor of receiving you. He has been a soldier, a smuggler, in fact, everything. I would not be quite sure that he has not been mixed up with the police for some trifle, a stab with a knife, for instance. And you have chosen this honest citizen for your steward, said Debray. Of how much does he rob you every year? On my word, replied the Count, not more than another. I am sure he answers my purpose, knows no impossibility, and so I keep him. Then, continued Château-Renaud, since you have an establishment, a steward, and a hotel in the Champs-Élysées, you only want a mistress. Albert smiled. He thought of the fair Greek he had seen in the Count's box at the Argentina and Val theaters. I have something better than that, said Monte Cristo. I have a slave. You procure your mistresses from the opera, the vaudeville, or the varietés. I purchased mine at Constantinople. It cost me more, but I have nothing to fear. But you forget, replied Debray, laughing, that we are Franks by name and Franks by nature, as King Charles said, and that the moment she puts her foot in France your slave becomes free. Who will tell her? The first person who sees her. She only speaks Romaic. That is different, but at least we shall see her, said Beauchamp. Or do you keep eunuchs as well as mutes? Oh no, replied Monte Cristo. I do not carry brutalism so far. Everyone who surrounds me is free to quit me, and when they leave me will no longer have any need of me or anyone else. It is for that reason, perhaps, that they do not quit me. They had long since passed to dessert and cigars. "My dear Albert," said Debray, rising, "it is 2:30. Your guest is charming, but you leave the best company to go into the worst sometimes. I must return to the minister's. I will tell him of the Count, and we shall soon know who he is." "Take care," returned Albert. "No one has been able to accomplish that. Oh, we have 3 millions for our police. It is true they are almost always spent beforehand, but no matter, we shall still have 50,000 francs to spend for this purpose. And when you know, will you tell me? I promise you. Au revoir, Albert. Gentlemen, good morning." As he left the room, Debray called out loudly, "My carriage." "Bravo," said Beauchamp to Albert. "I shall not go to the chamber, but I have something better to offer my readers than a speech of M. Danglars." "For heaven's sake, Beauchamp," returned Morcerf, "do not deprive me of the merit of introducing him everywhere." "Is he not peculiar?" "He is more than that," replied Châteaurenaud. "He is one of the most extraordinary men I ever saw in my life. Are you coming, Morel?" "Directly I have given my card to the Count, who has promised to pay us a visit at Rue Meslay, No. 14. "Be sure I shall not fail to do so," returned the Count, bowing. And Maximilien Morel left the room with the Baron de Châteaurenaud, leaving Monte Cristo alone with Morcerf.
Chapter 41.
When Albert found himself alone with Monte Cristo, "My dear Count," said he, "allow me to commence my services as cicerone by showing you a specimen of a bachelor's apartment. You, who are accustomed to the palaces of Italy, can amuse yourself by calculating in how many square feet a young man who is not the worst lodged in Paris can live. As we pass from one room to another, I will open the windows to let you breathe." Monte Cristo had already seen the breakfast room and the salon on the ground floor. Albert led him first to his atelier, which was, as we have said, his favorite apartment. Monte Cristo quickly appreciated all that Albert had collected here: old cabinets, Japanese porcelain, oriental stuffs, Venetian glass, arms from all parts of the world. Everything was familiar to him, and at the first glance he recognized their date, their country, and their origin. Morcerf had expected he should be the guide. On the contrary, it was he who, under the Countess' guidance, followed a course of archaeology, mineralogy, and natural history. They descended to the first floor. Albert led his guest into the salon. The salon was filled with the works of modern artists. There were landscapes by Duper, with their long reeds and tall trees, their lowing oxen and marvelous skis. Delacroix's Arabian cavaliers with their long white burnouses, their shining belts, their damasked arms, their horses, who tore each other with their teeth while their riders contended fiercely with their maces. Aquarelles of Boulanger, representing Notre Dame de Paris with that vigor that makes the artist the rival of the poet. There were paintings by Diaz, who makes his flowers more beautiful than flowers, his suns more brilliant than the sun. Designs by Decamp, as vividly colored as those of Salvator Rosa, but more poetic. Pastels by Giraud and M. Leller, representing children like angels and women with the features of a virgin. Sketches torn from the album of Dauzet's Travels in the East, that had been made in a few seconds on the saddle of a camel, or beneath the dome of a mosque. In a word, all that modern art can give in exchange, and as recompense for the art lost and gone with ages long since past. Albert expected to have something new this time to show to the traveler, but, to his great surprise, the latter, without seeking for the signatures, many of which indeed were only initials, named instantly the author of every picture in such a manner that it was easy to see that each name was not only known to him, but that each style associated with it had been appreciated and studied by him. From the salon they passed into the bedchamber. It was a model of taste and simple elegance. A single portrait, signed by L. Oppold Robert, shone in its carved and gilded frame. This portrait attracted the Count of Monte Cristo's attention, for he made 3 rapid steps in the chamber and stopped suddenly before it. It was the portrait of a young woman of 5 or 26, with a dark complexion and light and lustrous eyes veiled beneath long lashes. She wore the picturesque costume of the Catalan fisherwomen, a red and black bodice and golden pins in her hair. She was looking at the sea, and her form was outlined on the blue ocean and sky. The light was so faint in the room that Albert did not perceive the pallor that spread itself over the Count's visage, or the nervous heaving of his chest and shoulders. Silence prevailed for an instant, during which Monte Cristo gazed intently on the picture. "You have there a most charming mistress, Viscount," said the Count in a perfectly calm tone, "and this costume, a ball costume, doubtless becomes her admirably." "Ah, monsieur," returned Albert, "I would never forgive you this mistake if you had seen another picture beside this. You do not know my mother. She it is whom you see here. She had her portrait painted thus 6 or 8 years ago. This costume is a fancy one, it appears, and the resemblance is so great that I think I still see my mother the same as she was in 1830. The Countess had this portrait painted during the Count's absence. She doubtless intended giving him an agreeable surprise, but strange to say, this portrait seemed to displease my father, and the value of the picture, which is, as you see, one of the best works of Old Robert, could not overcome his dislike to it. It is true, between ourselves, that M. de Morcerf is one of the most assiduous peers at the Luxembourg, a general renowned for theory, but a most mediocre amateur of art. It is different with my mother, who paints exceedingly well, and who, unwilling to part with so valuable a picture, gave it to me to put here, where it would be less likely to displease M. de Morcerf, whose portrait by Gros I will also show you. Excuse my talking of family matters, but as I shall have the honor of introducing you to the Count, I tell you this to prevent you making any allusions to this picture. The picture seems to have a malign influence, for my mother rarely comes here without looking at it, and still more rarely does she look at it without weeping. This disagreement is the only one that has ever taken place between the Count and Countess, who are still as much united, although married more than 20 years, as on the first day of their wedding." Monte Cristo glanced rapidly at Albert, as if to seek a hidden meaning in his words, but it was evident the young man uttered them in the simplicity of his heart. "Now," said Albert, "that you have seen all my treasures, allow me to offer them to you, unworthy as they are. Consider yourself as in your own house, and to put yourself still more at your ease, pray accompany me to the apartments of M. de Morcerf, he whom I wrote from Rome an account of the services you rendered me, and to whom I announced your promised visit, and I may say that both the Count and Countess anxiously desire to thank you in person. You are somewhat blasé, I know, and family scenes have not much effect on Sinbad the sailor, who has seen so many others. However, accept what I propose to you as an initiation into Parisian life, a life of politeness, visiting, and introductions." Monte Cristo bowed without making any answer. He accepted the offer without enthusiasm and without regret, as one of those conventions of society which every gentleman looks upon as a duty. Albert summoned his servant and ordered him to acquaint M. and Madame de Morcerf of the arrival of the Count of Monte Cristo. Albert followed him with the Count. When they arrived at the antechamber, above the door was visible a shield, which, by its rich ornaments and its harmony with the rest of the furniture, indicated the importance the owner attached to this blazon. Monte Cristo stopped and examined it attentively. "Azure 7 merlets, or placed bender," said he. "These are doubtless your family arms. Except the knowledge of blazons that enables me to decipher them, I am very ignorant of heraldry. Account of a fresh creation, fabricated in Tuscany by the aid of a commandery of St. Stephen, and who would not have taken the trouble had I not been told that when you travel much it is necessary. Besides, you must have something on the panels of your carriage to escape being searched by the custom-house officers. "Excuse my putting such a question to you. It is not indiscreet," returned Morcerf, with the simplicity of conviction. "You have guessed rightly. These are our arms, that is, those of my father, but they are, as you see, joined to another shield which has gules, a silver tower, which are my mother's. By her side I am Spanish, but the family of Morcerf is French, and I have heard, one of the oldest of the south of France." "Yes," replied Monte Cristo, "these blazons prove that almost all the armed pilgrims that went to the Holy Land took for their arms either a cross, in honor of their mission, or birds of passage, in sign of the long voyage they were about to undertake, and which they hoped to accomplish on the wings of faith. One of your ancestors had joined the Crusades, and supposing it to be only that of St. Louis, that makes you mount to the 13th century, which is tolerably ancient." "It is possible," said Morcerf. "My father has in his study a genealogical tree which will tell you all that, and on which I made commentaries that would have greatly edified Hosier and Jaucourt. At present I no longer think of it, and yet I must tell you that we are beginning to occupy ourselves greatly with these things under our popular government." "Well, then, your government would do well to choose from the past something better than the things that I have noticed on your monuments, and which have no heraldic meaning whatever. As for you, Viscount," continued Monte Cristo to Morcerf, "you are more fortunate than the government, for your arms are really beautiful and speak to the imagination. Yes, you are at once from Provence in Spain. That explains, if the portrait you showed me be like, the dark hue I so much admired on the visage of the noble Catalan. It would have required the penetration of Dippus, or the Sphinx to have divined the irony the Count concealed beneath these words, apparently uttered with the greatest politeness." Morcerf thanked him with a smile and pushed open the door above which were his arms, and which, as we have said, opened into the salon. In the most conspicuous part of the salon was another portrait. It was that of a man, from 5 to 8 and 30, in the uniform of a general officer, wearing the double epaulet of heavy bullion, that indicates superior rank, the ribbon of the Legion of Honor around his neck, which showed he was a commander, and on the right breast, the star of a grand officer of the Order of the Savior, and on the left that of the Grand Cross of Charles III, which proved that the person represented by the picture had served in the wars of Greece and Spain, or, what was just the same thing as regarded decorations, had fulfilled some diplomatic mission in the two countries. Monte Cristo was engaged in examining this portrait with no less care than he had bestowed upon the other, when another door opened, and he found himself opposite to the Count of Morcerf in person. He was a man of 40 to 45 years, but he seemed at least 50, and his black mustache and eyebrows contrasted strangely with his almost white hair, which was cut short in the military fashion. He was dressed in plain clothes, and wore at his buttonhole the ribbons of the different orders to which he belonged. He entered with a tolerably dignified step, and some little haste. Monte Cristo saw him advance towards him without making a single step. It seemed as if his feet were rooted to the ground, and his eyes on the Count of Morcerf. "Father," said the young man, "I have the honor of presenting to you the Count of Monte Cristo, the generous friend whom I had the good fortune to meet in the critical situation of which I have told you." "You are most welcome, monsieur," said the Count of Morcerf, saluting Monte Cristo with a smile, "and monsieur has rendered our house, in preserving its only heir, a service which ensures him our eternal gratitude." As he said these words, the Count of Morcerf pointed to a chair, while he seated himself in another opposite the window. Monte Cristo, in taking the seat Morcerf offered him, placed himself in such a manner as to remain concealed in the shadow of the large velvet curtains, and read on the careworn and livid features of the Count a whole history of secret griefs written in each wrinkle time had planted there. "The Countess," said Morcerf, "was at her toilet when she was informed of the visit she was about to receive. She will, however, be in the salon in 10 minutes. It is a great honor to me, returned Monte Cristo to be thus, on the first day of my arrival in Paris, brought in contact with a man whose merit equals his reputation, and to whom fortune has for once been equitable, but has she not still on the plains of Midige, or in the mountains of Atlas, a marshal's staff to offer you? Oh, replied Morcerf, reddening slightly, I have left the service, monsieur. Made a peer at the Restoration, I served through the first campaign under the orders of Marshal Bermont. I could, therefore, expect a higher rank, and who knows what might have happened had the elder branch remained on the throne. But the Revolution of July was, it seems, sufficiently glorious to allow itself to be ungrateful, and it was so for all services that did not date from the imperial period. I tendered my resignation, for when you have gained your epaulets on the battlefield, you do not know how to maneuver on the slippery grounds of the salons. I have hung up my sword and cast myself into politics. I have devoted myself to industry. I study the useful arts. During the 20 years I served, I often wished to do so, but I had not the time. These are the ideas that render your nation superior to any other, returned Monte Cristo. A gentleman of high birth, possessor of an ample fortune, you have consented to gain your promotion as an obscure soldier. Step by step this is uncommon. Then become general, peer of France, commander of the Legion of Honor. You consent to again commence a second apprenticeship, without any other hope or any other desire than that of one day becoming useful to your fellow creatures. This, indeed, is praiseworthy, nay, more, it is sublime. Albert looked on and listened with astonishment. He was not used to see Monte Cristo give vent to such bursts of enthusiasm. Alas, continued the stranger, doubtless to dispel the slight cloud that covered Morcerf's brow, we do not act thus in Italy. We grow according to our race and our species, and we pursue the same lines, and often the same uselessness, all our lives. But monsieur, said the Count of Morcerf, for a man of your merit, Italy is not a country, and France opens her arms to receive you. Respond to her call. France will not, perhaps, be always ungrateful. She treats her children ill, but she always welcomes strangers. Ah, father, said Albert with a smile, it is evident you do not know the Count of Monte Cristo. He despises all honors and contents himself with those written on his passport. That is the most just remark, replied the stranger, I ever heard made concerning myself. You have been free to choose your career, observed the Count of Morcerf, with a sigh, and you have chosen the path strewed with flowers. Precisely, monsieur, replied Monte Cristo with one of those smiles that a painter could never represent or a physiologist analyze. If I did not fear to fatigue you, said the general, evidently charmed with the Count's manners, I would have taken you to the chamber. There is a debate very curious to those who are strangers to our modern senators. I shall be most grateful, monsieur, if you will, at some future time, renew your offer, but I have been flattered with the hope of being introduced to the Countess, and I will therefore wait. Ah, here is my mother, cried the Viscount. Monte Cristo turned round hastily, and saw Madame de Morcerf at the entrance of the salon, at the door opposite to that by which her husband had entered, pale and motionless. When Monte Cristo turned round, she let fall her arm, which for some unknown reason had been resting on the gilded doorpost. She had been there some moments and had heard the last words of the visitor. The latter rose and bowed to the Countess, who inclined herself without speaking. Ah, good heavens, madame, said the Count, are you ill, or is it the heat of the room that affects you? Are you ill, mother? Cried the Viscount, springing towards her. She thanked them both with a smile. No, returned she, but I feel some emotion on seeing, for the first time, the man without whose intervention we should have been in tears and desolation. Monsieur, continued the Countess, advancing with the majesty of a queen, I owe to you the life of my son, and for this I bless you. Now, I thank you for the pleasure you give me in thus affording me the opportunity of thanking you as I have blessed you, from the bottom of my heart. The Count bowed again, but lower than before. He was even paler than Merc D.S. "Madame," said he, "the Count and yourself recompense too generously a simple action. To save a man, to spare a father-s feelings, or a mother-s sensibility, is not to do a good action, but a simple deed of humanity." At these words, uttered with the most exquisite sweetness and politeness, Madame de Morcerf replied, "It is very fortunate for my son, monsieur, that he found such a friend, and I thank God that things are thus." And Merc D.S. raised her fine eyes to heaven with so fervent an expression of gratitude that the Count fancied he saw tears in them. M. de Morcerf approached her. "Madame," said he, "I have already made my excuses to the Count for quitting him, and I pray you to do so also. The sitting commences at 2. It is now 3, and I am to speak." "Go then, and monsieur and I will strive our best to forget your absence," replied the Countess, with the same tone of deep feeling. "Monsieur," continued she, turning to Monte Cristo, "will you do us the honor of passing the rest of the day with us?" "Believe me, madame, I feel most grateful for your kindness, but I got out of my traveling carriage at your door this morning, and I am ignorant how I am installed in Paris, which I scarcely know. This is but a trifling inquietude, I know, but one that may be appreciated." "We shall have the pleasure another time," said the Countess. "You promise that?" Monte Cristo inclined himself without answering, but the gesture might pass for assent. "I will not detain you, monsieur," continued the Countess. "I would not have our gratitude become indiscreet or importunate." "My dear Count," said Albert, "I will endeavor to return your politeness at Rome, and place my coup at your disposal until your own be ready." "A thousand thanks for your kindness, Viscount," returned the Count of Monte Cristo, "but I suppose that M. Bertuccio has suitably employed the 4 hours and a half I have given him, and that I shall find a carriage of some sort ready at the door." Albert was used to the Count's manner of proceeding. He knew that, like Nero, he was in search of the impossible, and nothing astonished him. But wishing to judge with his own eyes how far the Count's orders had been executed, he accompanied him to the door of the house. Monte Cristo was not deceived. As soon as he appeared in the Count of Morcerf's antechamber, a footman, the same who at Rome had brought the Count's card to the 2 young men, and announced his visit, sprang into the vestibule, and when he arrived at the door, the illustrious traveler found his carriage awaiting him. It was a coup of collar-s building, and with horses and harness for which Drake had, to the knowledge of all the lions of Paris, refused on the previous day 700 guineas. "Monsieur," said the Count to Albert, "I do not ask you to accompany me to my house, as I can only show you a habitation fitted up in a hurry, and I have, as you know, a reputation to keep up as regards not being taken by surprise. Give me, therefore, 1 more day before I invite you. I shall then be certain not to fail in my hospitality. If you ask me for a day, Count, I know what to anticipate. It will not be a house I shall see, but a palace. You have decidedly some genius at your control." "Ma foi, spread that idea," replied the Count of Monte Cristo, putting his foot on the velvet-lined steps of his splendid carriage, "and that will be worth something to me among the ladies." As he spoke, he sprang into the vehicle. The door was closed, but not so rapidly that Monte Cristo failed to perceive the almost imperceptible movement which stirred the curtains of the apartment in which he had left Madame de Morcerf. When Albert returned to his mother, he found her in the boudoir reclining in a large velvet armchair, the whole room so obscure that only the shining spangle, fastened here and there to the drapery, and the angles of the gilded frames of the pictures, showed with some degree of brightness in the gloom. Albert could not see the face of the Countess, as it was covered with a thin veil she had put on her head, and which fell over her features in misty folds, but it seemed to him as though her voice had altered. He could distinguish amid the perfumes of the roses and heliotropes in the flower stands the sharp and fragrant odor of volatile salts, and he noticed in one of the chased cups on the mantelpiece the Countess's smelling bottle, taken from its shagreen case, and exclaimed in a tone of uneasiness as he entered, My dear mother, have you been ill during my absence? No, no, Albert, but you know these roses, tuberoses, and orange flowers throw out at first, before one is used to them, such violent perfumes. Then, my dear mother, said Albert, putting his hand to the bell, they must be taken into the antechamber. You are really ill, and just now were so pale as you came into the room. Was I pale, Albert? Yes, a pallor that suits you admirably, mother, but which did not the less alarm my father and myself. Did your father speak of it? Inquired Merc D.S. eagerly. No, madame, but do you not remember that he spoke of the fact to you? Yes, I do remember, replied the Countess. A servant entered, summoned by Albert's ring of the bell. Take these flowers into the anteroom or dressing-room, said the Viscount. They make the Countess ill. The footman obeyed his orders. A long pause ensued, which lasted until all the flowers were removed. What is this name of Monte Cristo? Inquired the Countess, when the servant had taken away the last vase of flowers. Is it a family name, or the name of the estate, or a simple title? I believe, mother, it is merely a title. The Count purchased an island in the Tuscan archipelago, and as he told you today, has founded a commandery. You know the same thing was done for St. Stephen of Florence, St. George Constantinian of Parma, and even for the Order of Malta. Except this, he has no pretension to nobility, and calls himself a chance count, although the general opinion at Rome is that the Count is a man of very high distinction. His manners are admirable, said the Countess, at least, as far as I could judge in the few minutes he remained here. They are perfect, mother, so perfect that they surpass by far all I have known in the leading aristocracy of the three proudest nobilities of Europe, the English, the Spanish, and the German. The Countess paused a moment. Then, after a slight hesitation, she resumed. You have seen, my dear Albert, I ask the question as a mother, you have seen M. de Monte Cristo in his house. You are quick-sighted, have much knowledge of the world, more tact than is usual at your age. Do you think the Count is really what he appears to be? What does he appear to be? Why, you have just said, a man of high distinction. I told you, my dear mother, he was esteemed such. But what is your own opinion, Albert? I must tell you that I have not come to any decided opinion respecting him, but I think him a Maltese. I do not ask you of his origin, but what he is. Ah, what he is, that is quite another thing. I have seen so many remarkable things in him, that if you would have me really say what I think, I shall reply that I really do look upon him as one of Byron's heroes, whom misery has marked with a fatal brand. Some Manfred, some Lara, some Werner, one of those wrecks, as it were, of some ancient family, who, disinherited of their patrimony, have achieved one by the force of their adventurous genius, which has placed them above the laws of society. You say, I say, that Monte Cristo is an island in the midst of the Mediterranean, without inhabitants or garrison, the resort of smugglers of all nations, and pirates of every flag. Who knows whether or not these industrious worthies do not pay to their feudal lord some dues for his protection? That is possible, said the Countess, reflecting. Never mind, continued the young man, smuggler or not, you must agree, mother dear, as you have seen him, that the Count of Monte Cristo is a remarkable man, who will have the greatest success in the salons of Paris. Why, this very morning, in my rooms, he made his enter amongst us by striking every man of us with amazement, not even excepting C.H. Tournaud. And what do you suppose is the Countess' age? Inquired Merc D.S., evidently attaching great importance to this question. 35 or 36, mother. So young, it is impossible, said Merc D.S., replying at the same time to what Albert said as well as to her own private reflection. It is the truth, however. 3 or 4 times he has said to me, and certainly without the slightest premeditation, at such a period I was 5 years old, at another 10 years old, at another 12. And I, induced by curiosity which kept me alive to these details, have compared the dates, and never found him inaccurate. The age of this singular man, who is of no age, is then, I am certain, 35. Besides, mother, remark how vivid his eye, how raven-black his hair, and his brow, though so pale, is free from wrinkles. He is not only vigorous but also young." The Countess bent her head, as if beneath a heavy wave of bitter thoughts. "And has this man displayed a friendship for you, Albert?" she asked with a nervous shudder. "I am inclined to think so. And do you like him?" "Why, he pleases me in spite of France de Pinay, who tries to convince me that he is a being returned from the other world." The Countess shuddered. "Albert," she said, in a voice which was altered by emotion, "I have always put you on your guard against new acquaintances. Now you are a man and are able to give me advice. Yet I repeat to you, Albert, be prudent." "Why, my dear mother, it is necessary, in order to make your advice turn to account, that I should know beforehand what I have to distrust. The Count never plays, he only drinks pure water tinged with a little sherry, and is so rich that he cannot, without intending to laugh at me, try to borrow money. What then have I to fear from him?" "You are right," said the Countess, "and my fears are weakness, especially when directed against a man who has saved your life. How did your father receive him, Albert? It is necessary that we should be more than complacent to the Count. M. de Morcerf is sometimes occupied. His business makes him reflective, and he might, without intending it. Nothing could be in better taste than my father's demeanor, madame," said Albert. Nay, more, he seemed greatly flattered at 2 or 3 compliments which the Count very skillfully and agreeably paid him with as much ease as if he had known him these 30 years. "Each of these little tickling arrows must have pleased my father," added Albert with a laugh. And thus they parted the best possible friends, and M. de Morcerf even wished to take him to the chamber to hear the speakers. The Countess made no reply. She fell into so deep a reverie that her eyes gradually closed. The young man, standing up before her, gazed upon her with that filial affection which is so tender and endearing with children whose mothers are still young and handsome. Then, after seeing her eyes closed, and hearing her breathe gently, he believed she had dropped asleep, and left the apartment on tiptoe, closing the door after him with the utmost precaution. "This devil of a fellow," he muttered, shaking his head. "I said at the time he would create a sensation here, and I measure his effect by an infallible thermometer. My mother has noticed him, and he must therefore, perforce, be remarkable." He went down to the stables, not without some slight annoyance, when he remembered that the Count of Monte Cristo had laid his hands on a turnout which sent his bays down to second place in the opinion of connoisseurs. "Most decidedly," said he, "men are not equal, and I must beg my father to develop this theorem in the Chamber of Peers."
Chapter 42.
Meanwhile the Count had arrived at his house. It had taken him 6 minutes to perform the distance, but these 6 minutes were sufficient to induce 20 young men who knew the price of the equipage they had been unable to purchase themselves, to put their horses in a gallop in order to see the rich foreigner who could afford to give 20,000 francs apiece for his horses. The house Ali had chosen, and which was to serve as a town residence to Monte Cristo, was situated on the right hand as you ascend the Champs-Élysées. A thick clump of trees and shrubs rose in the center, and masked a portion of the front. Around this shrubbery 2 alleys like 2 arms extended right and left, and formed a carriage drive from the iron gates to a double portico, on every step of which stood a porcelain vase, filled with flowers. This house, isolated from the rest, had, besides the main entrance, another in the Rue de Ponthieu. Even before the coachman had hailed the concierge, the massy gates rolled on their hinges. They had seen the Count coming, and at Paris, as everywhere else, he was served with the rapidity of lightning. The coachman entered and traversed the half-circle without slackening his speed, and the gates were closed ere the wheels had ceased to sound on the gravel. The carriage stopped at the left side of the portico. 2 men presented themselves at the carriage window. The one was Ali, who, smiling with an expression of the most sincere joy, seemed amply repaid by a mere look from Monte Cristo. The other bowed respectfully and offered his arm to assist the Count in descending. "Thanks, M. Bertuccio," said the Count, springing lightly up the 3 steps of the portico. "And the notary?" "He is in the small salon, Excellency," returned Bertuccio. "And the cards I ordered to be engraved as soon as you knew the number of the house. Your Excellency, it is done already. I have been myself to the best engraver of the Palais Royal, who did the plate in my presence. The first card struck off was taken, according to your orders, to the Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chausse et d'Antin, No. 7. The others are on the mantelpiece of your Excellency's bedroom." "Good. What o'clock is it?" "4 o'clock." Monte Cristo gave his hat, cane, and gloves to the same French footman who had called his carriage at the Count of Morcerf's, and then he passed into the small salon, preceded by Bertuccio, who showed him the way. "These are but indifferent marbles in this antechamber," said Monte Cristo. "I trust all this will soon be taken away." Bertuccio bowed. As the steward had said, the notary awaited him in the small salon. He was a simple-looking lawyer-s clerk, elevated to the extraordinary dignity of a provincial scrivener. "You are the notary empowered to sell the country house that I wish to purchase, monsieur?" asked Monte Cristo. "Yes, Count," returned the notary. "Is the deed of sale ready?" "Yes, Count. Have you brought it? Here it is." "Very well, and where is this house that I purchase?" asked the Count carelessly, addressing himself half to Bertuccio, half to the notary. The steward made a gesture that signified, "I do not know." The notary looked at the Count with astonishment. "What?" said he. "Does not the Count know where the house he purchases is situated?" "No," returned the Count. "The Count does not know. How should I know? I have arrived from Cadiz this morning. I have never before been at Paris, and it is the first time I have ever even set my foot in France." "Ah, that is different. The house you purchase is at Auteuil." At these words Bertuccio turned pale. "And where is Auteuil?" asked the Count. "Close by here, monsieur," replied the notary, "a little beyond Passy, a charming situation in the heart of the Bois de Boulogne." "So near as that?" said the Count. "But that is not in the country." "What made you choose a house at the gates of Paris, M. Bertuccio?" "I," cried the steward with a strange expression. "His Excellency did not charge me to purchase this house. If His Excellency will recollect, if he will think—" "Ah, true," observed Monte Cristo. "I recollect now. I read the advertisement in one of the papers and was tempted by the false title, a country house." "It is not yet too late," cried Bertuccio eagerly. "And if your Excellency will entrust me with the commission, I will find you a better at Enghien, at Fontenay-aux-Roses, or at Bellevue." "Oh no," returned Monte Cristo negligently. "Since I have this, I will keep it." "And you are quite right," said the notary, who feared to lose his fee. "It is a charming place, well supplied with spring water and fine trees, a comfortable habitation, although abandoned for a long time, without reckoning the furniture, which, although old, is yet valuable, now that old things are so much sought after. I suppose the Count has the tastes of the day." "To be sure," returned Monte Cristo. "It is very convenient then. It is magnificent, peste." "Let us not lose such an opportunity," returned Monte Cristo. "The deed, if you please, Mr. Notary." And he signed it rapidly, after having first run his eye over that part of the deed in which were specified the situation of the house and the names of the proprietors. "Bertuccio," said he, "give 55,000 francs to monsieur." The steward left the room with a faltering step, and returned with a bundle of banknotes, which the notary counted like a man who never gives a receipt for money until after he is sure it is all there. "And now," demanded the Count, "are all the forms complied with?" "All, sir." "Have you the keys?" "They are in the hands of the concierge, who takes care of the house, but here is the order I have given him to install the Count in his new possessions." "Very well." And Monte Cristo made a sign with his hand to the notary, which said, "I have no further need of you. You may go." "But," observed the honest notary, "the Count is, I think, mistaken. It is only 50,000 francs, everything included, and your fee is included in this sum. But have you not come from Auteuil here? Yes, certainly. Well then, it is but fair that you should be paid for your loss of time and trouble, said the Count, and he made a gesture of polite dismissal. The notary left the room backwards and bowing down to the ground. It was the first time he had ever met a similar client. See this gentleman out, said the Count to Bertuccio, and the steward followed the notary out of the room. Scarcely was the Count alone, when he drew from his pocket a book closed with a lock, and opened it with a key which he wore round his neck, and which never left him. After having sought for a few minutes, he stopped at a leaf which had several notes, and compared them with the deed of sale which lay on the table, and recalling his souvenirs Auteuil, Rue de la Fontaine, No. 28. It is indeed the same, said he. And now am I to rely upon an avowal extorted by religious or physical terror? However, in an hour I shall know all. Bertuccio, cried he, striking a light hammer with a pliant handle on a small gong. Bertuccio, the steward appeared at the door. Monsieur Bertuccio, said the Count, did you never tell me that you had traveled in France? In some parts of France, yes, Excellency. You know the environs of Paris, then? No, Excellency, no, returned the steward with a sort of nervous trembling, which Monte Cristo, a connoisseur in all emotions, rightly attributed to great disquietude. It is unfortunate, returned he, that you have never visited the environs, for I wish to see my new property this evening, and had you gone with me, you could have given me some useful information. To Auteuil, cried Bertuccio, whose copper complexion became livid, I go to Auteuil. Well, what is there surprising in that? When I live at Auteuil, you must come there, as you belong to my service. Bertuccio hung down his head before the imperious look of his master and remained motionless, without making any answer. Why, what has happened to you? Are you going to make me ring a second time for the carriage? Asked Monte Cristo in the same tone that Louis XIV. Pronounced the famous, I have been almost obliged to wait. Bertuccio made but one bound to the antechamber and cried in a hoarse voice, His Excellency's horses. Monte Cristo wrote 2 or 3 notes, and as he sealed the last, the steward appeared. Your Excellency's carriage is at the door, said he. Well, take your hat and gloves, returned Monte Cristo. Am I to accompany you, your Excellency? Cried Bertuccio. Certainly you must give the orders, for I intend residing at the house. It was unexampled for a servant of the Countess to dare to dispute an order of his. So the steward, without saying a word, followed his master, who got into the carriage, and signed to him to follow, which he did, taking his place respectfully on the front seat.
Chapter 43.
Monte Cristo noticed, as they descended the staircase, that Bertuccio signed himself in the Corsican manner, that is, had formed the sign of the cross in the air with his thumb, and as he seated himself in the carriage, muttered a short prayer. Anyone but a man of exhaustless thirst for knowledge would have had pity on seeing the steward's extraordinary repugnance for the Countess' projected drive without the walls. But the Count was too curious to let Bertuccio off from this little journey. In 20 minutes they were at Auteuil. The steward's emotion had continued to augment as they entered the village. Bertuccio, crouched in the corner of the carriage, began to examine with a feverish anxiety every house they passed. Tell them to stop at Rue de la Fontaine, No. 28, said the Count, fixing his eyes on the steward to whom he gave this order. Bertuccio's forehead was covered with perspiration. However, he obeyed, and leaning out of the window, he cried to the coachman, Rue de la Fontaine, No. 28. No. 28 was situated at the extremity of the village. During the drive night had set in, and darkness gave the surroundings the artificial appearance of a scene on the stage. The carriage stopped. The footman sprang off the box and opened the door. Well, said the Count, you do not get out, M. Bertuccio, you are going to stay in the carriage, then. What are you thinking of this evening? Bertuccio sprang out and offered his shoulder to the Count, who, this time, leaned upon it as he descended the 3 steps of the carriage. "Knock," said the Count, "and announce me." Bertuccio knocked, the door opened, and the concierge appeared. "What is it?" asked he. "It is your new master, my good fellow," said the footman, and he held out to the concierge the notary's order. "The house is sold, then?" demanded the concierge, "and this gentleman is coming to live here?" "Yes, my friend," returned the Count, "and I will endeavor to give you no cause to regret your old master." "Oh, monsieur," said the concierge, "I shall not have much cause to regret him, for he came here but seldom. It is 5 years since he was here last, and he did well to sell the house, for it did not bring him in anything at all." "What was the name of your old master?" said Monte Cristo. "The Marquis of Saint-Emran." "Ah, I am sure he has not sold the house for what he gave for it." "The Marquis of Saint-Emran," returned the Count. "The name is not unknown to me, the Marquis of Saint-Emran," and he appeared to meditate. "An old gentleman," continued the concierge, "a staunch follower of the Bourbons. He had an only daughter who married M. de Villefort, who had been the king's attorney at Nice, and afterwards at Versailles." Monte Cristo glanced at Bertuccio, who became whiter than the wall against which he leaned to prevent himself from falling. "And is not this daughter dead?" demanded Monte Cristo. "I fancy I have heard so." "Yes, monsieur, 21 years ago, and since then we have not seen the poor Marquis 3 times. "Thanks, thanks," said Monte Cristo, judging from the steward's utter prostration that he could not stretch the cord further without danger of breaking it. "Give me a light." "Shall I accompany you, monsieur?" "No, it is unnecessary. Bertuccio will show me a light." And Monte Cristo accompanied these words by the gift of 2 gold pieces, which produced a torrent of thanks and blessings from the concierge. "Ah, monsieur," said he, after having vainly searched on the mantelpiece and the shelves, "I have not got any candles." "Take one of the carriage lamps, Bertuccio," said the Count, "and show me the apartments." The steward obeyed in silence, but it was easy to see, from the manner in which the hand that held the light trembled, how much it cost him to obey. They went over a tolerably large ground floor. A first floor consisted of a salon, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. Near one of the bedrooms they came to a winding staircase that led down to the garden. "Ah, here is a private staircase," said the Count. "That is convenient. Light me, M. Bertuccio, and go first. We will see where it leads to." "Monsieur," replied Bertuccio, "it leads to the garden." "And pray, how do you know that?" "It ought to do so, at least." "Well, let us be sure of that." Bertuccio sighed and went on first. The stairs did indeed lead to the garden. At the outer door the steward paused. "Go on, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count. But he who was addressed stood there, stupefied, bewildered, stunned. His haggard eyes glanced around as if in search of the traces of some terrible event, and with his clenched hands he seemed striving to shut out horrible recollections. "Well," insisted the Count. "No, no," cried Bertuccio, setting down the lantern at the angle of the interior wall. "No, monsieur, it is impossible. I can go no farther." "What does this mean?" demanded the irresistible voice of Monte Cristo. "Why, you must see, your excellency," cried the steward, "that this is not natural. That, having a house to purchase, you purchase it exactly at Auteuil, and that, purchasing it at Auteuil, this house should be No. 28, Rue de la Fontaine. Oh, why did I not tell you all? I am sure you would not have forced me to come. I hoped your house would have been some other one than this, as if there was not another house at Auteuil than that of the assassination." What?" cried Monte Cristo, stopping suddenly. "What words do you utter? Devil of a man, Corsican that you are, always mysteries or superstitions. Come, take the lantern, and let us visit the garden. You are not afraid of ghosts with me, I hope." Bertuccio raised the lantern and obeyed. The door, as it opened, disclosed a gloomy sky, in which the moon strove vainly to struggle through a sea of clouds that covered her with billows of vapor which she illumined for an instant, only to sink into obscurity. The steward wished to turn to the left. No, no, monsieur, said Monte Cristo. What is the use of following the alleys? Here is a beautiful lawn. Let us go on straight forwards. Bertuccio wiped the perspiration from his brow, but obeyed. However, he continued to take the left hand. Monte Cristo, on the contrary, took the right hand. Arrived near a clump of trees, he stopped. The steward could not restrain himself. Move, monsieur, move away, I entreat you. You are exactly in the spot. What spot? Where he fell. My dear Monsieur Bertuccio, said Monte Cristo, laughing, control yourself. We are not at Sarteny or at court. This is not a Corsican marquis, but an English garden. Badly kept, I own, but still you must not calumniate it for that. Monsieur, I implore you do not stay there. I think you are going mad, Bertuccio, said the Count coldly. If that is the case, I warn you, I shall have you put in a lunatic asylum. Alas! Excellency, returned Bertuccio, joining his hands and shaking his head in a manner that would have excited the Countess' laughter, had not thoughts of a superior interest occupied him, and rendered him attentive to the least revelation of this timorous conscience. Alas! Excellency, the evil has arrived. Bertuccio, said the Count, I am very glad to tell you that while you gesticulate, you wring your hands and roll your eyes like a man possessed by a devil who will not leave him. And I have always observed that the devil most obstinate to be expelled is a secret. I knew you were a Corsican. I knew you were gloomy and always brooding over some old history of the vendetta, and I overlooked that in Italy, because in Italy those things are thought nothing of. But in France they are considered in very bad taste. There are gendarmes who occupy themselves with such affairs, judges who condemn, and scaffolds which avenge. Bertuccio clasped his hands, and as in all these evolutions he did not let fall the lantern, the light showed his pale and altered countenance. Monte Cristo examined him with the same look that, at Rome, he had bent upon the execution of Andrea, and then, in a tone that made a shudder pass through the veins of the poor steward, the Abbé Busoni then told me an untruth, said he, when, after his journey in France in 1829, he sent you to me with a letter of recommendation in which he enumerated all your valuable qualities. Well, I shall write to the Abbé. I shall hold him responsible for his protége's misconduct, and I shall soon know all about this assassination. Only I warn you that when I reside in a country, I conform to all its code, and I have no wish to put myself within the compass of the French laws for your sake. Oh, do not do that, Excellency. I have always served you faithfully, cried Bertuccio in despair. I have always been an honest man, and as far as lay in my power I have done good. I do not deny it, returned the Count, but why are you thus agitated? It is a bad sign. A quiet conscience does not occasion such paleness in the cheeks and such fever in the hands of a man. But your Excellency, replied Bertuccio hesitatingly, did not the Abbé Busoni, who heard my confession in the prison at Nimes, tell you that I had a heavy burden upon my conscience? Yes, but as he said you would make an excellent steward, I concluded you had stolen. That was all. Oh, your Excellency, returned Bertuccio in deep contempt. Or, as you are a Corsican, that you had been unable to resist the desire of making a stiff, as you call it. Yes, my good master, cried Bertuccio, casting himself at the Count's feet. It was simply vengeance, nothing else. I understand that, but I do not understand what it is that galvanizes you in this manner. But, monsieur, it is very natural, returned Bertuccio, since it was in this house that my vengeance was accomplished. What? My house? Oh, your Excellency, it was not yours then. Whose then? The Marquis de Saint-Méran, I think the concierge said. What had you to revenge on the Marquis de Saint-Méran? Oh, it was not on him, monsieur. It was on another. This is strange, returned Monte Cristo, seeming to yield to his reflections, that you should find yourself without any preparation in a house where the event happened that causes you so much remorse. Monsieur, said the steward, it is fatality, I am sure. First, you purchase a house at Auteuil. This house is the one where I have committed an assassination. You descend to the garden by the same staircase by which he descended. You stop at the spot where he received the blow, and 2 paces farther is the grave in which he had just buried his child. This is not chance, for chance in this case is too much like providence. Well, amiable Corsican, let us suppose it is providence. I always suppose anything people please, and besides, you must concede something to diseased minds. Come, collect yourself and tell me all. I have related it but once, and that was to the Abbé Busoni. Such things, continued Bertuccio, shaking his head, are only related under the seal of confession. Then, said the Count, I refer you to your confessor. Turn chartreux or Trappist, and relate your secrets. But, as for me, I do not like anyone who is alarmed by such phantasms, and I do not choose that my servants should be afraid to walk in the garden of an evening. I confess I am not very desirous of a visit from the commissary of police, for in Italy justice is only paid when silent. In France she is paid only when she speaks. Peste! I thought you somewhat Corsican, a great deal smuggler and an excellent steward, but I see you have other strings to your bow. You are no longer in my service, Monsieur Bertuccio. Oh, your excellency, cried the steward, struck with terror at this threat. If that is the only reason I cannot remain in your service, I will tell all, for if I quit you it will only be to go to the scaffold. That is different, replied Monte Cristo. But if you intend to tell an untruth, reflect it were better not to speak at all. No, monsieur, I swear to you, by my hopes of salvation, I will tell you all, for the Abbé Busoni himself only knew a part of my secret. But I pray you, go away from that plane tree. The moon is just bursting through the clouds, and there, standing where you do, and wrapped in that cloak that conceals your figure, you remind me of M. de Villefort. What? Cried Monte Cristo. It was M. de Villefort. Your excellency knows him, the former royal attorney at Nimes. Yes. Who married the Marquis of Saint Méran's daughter. Yes. Who enjoyed the reputation of being the most severe, the most upright, the most rigid magistrate on the bench. Well, monsieur, said Bertuccio, this man with this spotless reputation, well, was a villain. Bah, replied Monte Cristo, impossible. It is as I tell you. Ah, really, said Monte Cristo. Have you proof of this? I had it. And you have lost it, how stupid. Yes, but by careful search it might be recovered. Really, returned the Count, relate it to me, for it begins to interest me. And the Count, humming an air from Lucia, went to sit down on a bench, while Bertuccio followed him, collecting his thoughts. Bertuccio remained standing before him.
Chapter 44.
At what point shall I begin my story, your excellency? Asked Bertuccio. Where you please, returned Monte Cristo, since I know nothing at all of it. I thought the Abbé Busoni had told your excellency. Some particulars, doubtless, but that is 7 or 8 years ago, and I have forgotten them. Then I can speak without fear of tiring your excellency. Go on, M. Bertuccio. You will supply the want of the evening papers. The story begins in 1815. Ah, said Monte Cristo, 1815 is not yesterday. No, monsieur, and yet I recollect all things as clearly as if they had happened but then. I had a brother, an elder brother, who was in the service of the emperor. He had become lieutenant in a regiment composed entirely of Corsicans. This brother was my only friend. We became orphans, I at 5, he at 18. He brought me up as if I had been his son, and in 1814 he married. When the emperor returned from the island of Elba, my brother instantly joined the army, was slightly wounded at Waterloo, and retired with the army beyond the Loire. But that is the history of the 100 days, M. Bertuccio, said the Count. Unless I am mistaken, it has been already written. Excuse me, excellency, but these details are necessary, and you promise to be patient. Go on, I will keep my word. One day we received a letter. I should tell you that we lived in the little village of Rogliano, at the extremity of Cap Corse. This letter was from my brother. He told us that the army was disbanded, and that he should return by Ch. Toru, Clermont-Ferrand, Le Pai, and Ennemis, and if I had any money, he prayed me to leave it for him at Enmies, with an innkeeper with whom I had dealings. In the smuggling line, said Monte Cristo. Your Excellency, everyone must live. Certainly, go on. I loved my brother tenderly, as I told your Excellency, and I resolved not to send the money, but to take it to him myself. I possessed 1,000 francs. I left 500 with Assunta, my sister-in-law, and with the other 500 I set off for Enmies. It was easy to do so, and as I had my boat and a lading to take in at sea, everything favored my project. But after we had taken in our cargo, the wind became contrary, so that we were 4 or 5 days without being able to enter the Rhne. At last, however, we succeeded, and worked up to Arles. I left the boat between Bellegarde and Beaucaire and took the road to Enmies. We are getting to the story now. Yes, your Excellency, excuse me, but, as you will see, I only tell you what is absolutely necessary. Just at this time, the famous massacres took place in the south of France. 3 brigands, called Trestillon, Truffamy, and Graffin, publicly assassinated everybody whom they suspected of Bonapartism. You have doubtless heard of these massacres, your Excellency. Vaguely, I was far from France at that period. Go on. As I entered Enmies, I literally waded in blood. At every step you encountered dead bodies and bands of murderers, who killed, plundered, and burned. At the sight of this slaughter and devastation I became terrified, not for myself, for I, a simple Corsican fisherman, had nothing to fear. On the contrary, that time was most favorable for us smugglers, but for my brother, a soldier of the Empire, returning from the army of the Loire, with his uniform and his epaulets, there was everything to apprehend. I hastened to the innkeeper. My misgivings had been but too true. My brother had arrived the previous evening at Enmies, and at the very door of the house where he was about to demand hospitality, he had been assassinated. I did all in my power to discover the murderers, but no one durst tell me their names, so much were they dreaded. I then thought of that French justice of which I had heard so much, and which feared nothing, and I went to the King's attorney. And this King's attorney was named Villefort. Asked Monte Cristo carelessly. Yes, your Excellency. He came from Marseille, where he had been deputy procureur. His zeal had procured him advancement, and he was said to be one of the first who had informed the government of the departure from the island of Elba. Then, said Monte Cristo, you went to him. Monsieur, I said, my brother was assassinated yesterday in the streets of Enmies. I know not by whom, but it is your duty to find out. You are the representative of justice here, and it is for justice to avenge those she has been unable to protect. Who was your brother? Asked he. A lieutenant in the Corsican battalion. A soldier of the usurper, then. A soldier of the French army. Well, replied he is smitten with the sword, and he has perished by the sword. You are mistaken, monsieur, I replied. He has perished by the poniard. What do you want me to do? Asked the magistrate. I have already told you, avenge him. On whom? On his murderers. How should I know who they are? Order them to be sought for. Why, your brother has been involved in a quarrel and killed in a duel. All these old soldiers commit excesses which were tolerated in the time of the emperor, but which are not suffered now, for the people here do not like soldiers of such disorderly conduct. Monsieur, I replied, it is not for myself that I entreat your interference. I should grieve for him or avenge him, but my poor brother had a wife, and were anything to happen to me, the poor creature would perish from want, for my brother's pay alone kept her. Pray try and obtain a small government pension for her. Every revolution has its catastrophes, returned M. de Villefort. Your brother has been the victim of this. It is a misfortune, and government owes nothing to his family. If we are to judge by all the vengeance that the followers of the usurper exercised on the partisans of the king, when in their turn they were in power, your brother would be today, in all probability, condemned to death. What has happened is quite natural and in conformity with the law of reprisals. What, cried I, do you, a magistrate, speak thus to me? All these Corsicans are mad on my honor, replied M. de Villefort. They fancy that their countryman is still emperor. You have mistaken the time. You should have told me this 2 months ago. It is too late now. Go now at once, or I shall have you put out. I looked at him an instant to see if there was anything to hope from further entreaty, but he was a man of stone. I approached him and said in a low voice, "Well, since you know the Corsicans so well, you know that they always keep their word. You think that it was a good deed to kill my brother, who was a Bonapartist, because you are a royalist. Well, I, who am a Bonapartist also, declare one thing to you, which is that I will kill you. From this moment I declare the vendetta against you, so protect yourself as well as you can, for the next time we meet your last hour has come." And before he had recovered from his surprise, I opened the door and left the room. "Well, well," said Monte Cristo, "such an innocent-looking person as you are to do those things, M. Bertuccio, and to a king's attorney at that." But did he know what was meant by the terrible word vendetta? He knew so well that from that moment he shut himself in his house and never went out unattended, seeking me high and low. Fortunately, I was so well concealed that he could not find me. Then he became alarmed and dared not stay any longer at Ennemis, so he solicited a change of residence, and as he was in reality very influential, he was nominated to Versailles. But as you know, a Corsican who has sworn to avenge himself cares not for distance, so his carriage, fast as it went, was never above half a day's journey before me, who followed him on foot. The most important thing was, not to kill him only for I had an opportunity of doing so 100 times, but to kill him without being discovered, at least, without being arrested. I no longer belonged to myself, for I had my sister-in-law to protect and provide for. For 3 months I watched M. de Villefort. For 3 months he took not a step out of doors without my following him. At length I discovered that he went mysteriously to Auteuil. I followed him thither, and I saw him enter the house where we now are, only, instead of entering by the great door that looks into the street, he came on horseback, or in his carriage, left the one or the other at the little inn, and entered by the gate you see there. Monte Cristo made a sign with his head to show that he could discern in the darkness the door to which Bertuccio alluded. As I had nothing more to do at Versailles, I went to Auteuil and gained all the information I could. If I wished to surprise him, it was evident this was the spot to lie in wait for him. The house belonged, as the concierge informed your Excellency, to M. de Saint-Emran, Villefort's father-in-law. M. de Saint-Emran lived at Marseille, so that this country house was useless to him, and it was reported to be let to a young widow, known only by the name of the Baroness. One evening, as I was looking over the wall, I saw a young and handsome woman who was walking alone in that garden, which was not overlooked by any windows, and I guessed that she was awaiting M. de Villefort. When she was sufficiently near for me to distinguish her features, I saw she was from 18 to 19, tall and very fair. As she had a loose muslin dress on, and as nothing concealed her figure, I saw she would ere long become a mother. A few moments after, the little door was opened and a man entered. The young woman hastened to meet him. They threw themselves into each other's arms, embraced tenderly, and returned together to the house. The man was M. de Villefort. I fully believed that when he went out in the night, he would be forced to traverse the whole of the garden alone, and asked the Count, "Did you ever know the name of this woman?" "No, Excellency," returned Bertuccio. "You will see that I had no time to learn it. Go on." "That evening," continued Bertuccio, "I could have killed the procureur, but as I was not sufficiently acquainted with the neighborhood, I was fearful of not killing him on the spot, and that if his cries were overheard I might be taken. So I put it off until the next occasion, and in order that nothing should escape me, I took a chamber looking into the street bordered by the wall of the garden. 3 days after, about 7 o'clock in the evening, I saw a servant on horseback leave the house at full gallop and take the road to Esvrez. I concluded that he was going to Versailles, and I was not deceived. 3 hours later the man returned covered with dust. His errand was performed, and 2 minutes after, another man on foot, muffled in a mantle, opened the little door of the garden, which he closed after him. I descended rapidly. Although I had not seen Villefort's face, I recognized him by the beating of my heart. I crossed the street and stopped at a post placed at the angle of the wall, and by means of which I had once before looked into the garden. This time I did not content myself with looking, but I took my knife out of my pocket, felt that the point was sharp, and sprang over the wall. My first care was to run to the door. He had left the key in it, taking the simple precaution of turning it twice in the lock. Nothing, then, preventing my escape by this means, I examined the grounds. The garden was long and narrow. A stretch of smooth turf extended down the middle, and at the corners were clumps of trees with thick and massy foliage that made a background for the shrubs and flowers. In order to go from the door to the house, or from the house to the door, M. de Villefort would be obliged to pass by one of these clumps of trees. It was the end of September. The wind blew violently. The faint glimpses of the pale moon, hidden momentarily by masses of dark clouds that were sweeping across the sky, whitened the gravel walks that led to the house, but were unable to pierce the obscurity of the thick shrubberies, in which a man could conceal himself without any fear of discovery. I hid myself in the one nearest to the path Villefort must take, and scarcely was I there when, amidst the gusts of wind, I fancied I heard groans. But you know, or rather you do not know, Your Excellency, that he who is about to commit an assassination fancies that he hears low cries perpetually ringing in his ears. 2 hours passed thus, during which I imagined I heard moans repeatedly. Midnight struck. As the last stroke died away, I saw a faint light shine through the windows of the private staircase by which we have just descended. The door opened, and the man in the mantle reappeared. The terrible moment had come, but I had so long been prepared for it that my heart did not fail in the least. I drew my knife from my pocket again, opened it, and made ready to strike. The man in the mantle advanced towards me, but as he drew near I saw that he had a weapon in his hand. I was afraid, not of a struggle, but of a failure. When he was only a few paces from me, I saw that what I had taken for a weapon was only a spade. I was still unable to divine for what reason M. de Villefort had this spade in his hands, when he stopped close to the thicket where I was, glanced round, and began to dig a hole in the earth. I then perceived that he was hiding something under his mantle, which he laid on the grass in order to dig more freely. Then, I confess, curiosity mingled with hatred. I wished to see what Villefort was going to do there, and I remained motionless, holding my breath. Then an idea crossed my mind, which was confirmed when I saw the procureur lift from under his mantle a box 2 feet long and 6 or 8 inches deep. I let him place the box in the hole he had made then, while he stamped with his feet to remove all traces of his occupation. I rushed on him and plunged my knife into his breast, exclaiming, "I am Giovanni Bertuccio, thy death for my brother S., thy treasure for his widow. Thou seest that my vengeance is more complete than I had hoped." I know not if he heard these words. I think he did not, for he fell without a cry. I felt his blood gush over my face, but I was intoxicated, I was delirious, and the blood refreshed instead of burning me. In a second I had disinterred the box. Then, that it might not be known I had done so, I filled up the hole, threw the spade over the wall, and rushed through the door, which I double-locked, carrying off the key. "Ah," said Monte Cristo, "it seems to me this was nothing but murder and robbery." "No, Your Excellency," returned Bertuccio, "it was a vendetta followed by restitution. And was the sum a large one? It was not money." "Ah, I recollect," replied the Count. "Did you not say something of an infant?" "Yes, Excellency, I hastened to the river, sat down on the bank, and with my knife forced open the lock of the box. In a fine linen cloth was wrapped a new-born child. Its purple visage and its violet-colored hands showed that it had perished from suffocation. But as it was not yet cold, I hesitated to throw it into the water that ran at my feet. After a moment, I fancied that I felt a slight pulsation of the heart, and as I had been assistant at the hospital at Bastia, I did what a doctor would have done. I inflated the lungs by blowing air into them, and at the expiration of a quarter of an hour, it began to breathe and cried feebly. In my turn, I uttered a cry, but a cry of joy. God has not cursed me then, I cried, since he permits me to save the life of a human creature, in exchange for the life I have taken away. And what did you do with the child? Asked Monte Cristo. It was an embarrassing load for a man seeking to escape. I had not for a moment the idea of keeping it, but I knew that at Paris there was an asylum where they receive such creatures. As I passed the city gates, I declared that I had found the child on the road, and I inquired where the asylum was. The box confirmed my statement. The linen proved that the infant belonged to wealthy parents. The blood with which I was covered might have proceeded from the child as well as from anyone else. No objection was raised, but they pointed out the asylum, which was situated at the upper end of the Rue d'Enfer, and after having taken the precaution of cutting the linen in 2 pieces, so that one of the 2 letters which marked it was on the piece wrapped around the child, while the other remained in my possession, I rang the bell and fled with all speed. A fortnight after I was at Rogliano, and I said to Assunta, "Console thyself, sister, Israel is dead, but he is avenged." She demanded what I meant, and when I had told her all, "Giovanni," said she, "you should have brought this child with you. We would have replaced the parents it has lost, have called it Benedetto, and then, in consequence of this good action, God would have blessed us." In reply, I gave her the half of the linen I had kept in order to reclaim him if we became rich. "What letters were marked on the linen?" said Monte Cristo. "An H and an N, surmounted by a Baron-S coronet. By heaven, M. Bertuccio, you make use of heraldic terms. Where did you study heraldry?" "In your service, Excellency, where everything is learned." "Go on, I am curious to know 2 things. What are they, Your Excellency?" "What became of this little boy? For I think you told me it was a boy, M. Bertuccio." "No, Excellency, I do not recollect telling you that. I thought you did. I must have been mistaken." "No, you were not, for it was in reality a little boy." "But Your Excellency wished to know 2 things. What was the second?" "The second was the crime of which you were accused when you asked for a confessor, and the Abbé Busoni came to visit you at your request in the prison at Enmise. The story will be very long, Excellency." "What matter? You know I take but little sleep, and I do not suppose you are very much inclined for it either." Bertuccio bowed and resumed his story. "Partly to drown the recollections of the past that haunted me, partly to supply the wants of the poor widow, I eagerly returned to my trade of smuggler, which had become more easy since that relaxation of the laws which always follows a revolution. The southern districts were ill watched in particular, in consequence of the disturbances that were perpetually breaking out in Avignon, Enmise, or us. We profited by this respite on the part of the government to make friends everywhere. Since my brother's assassination in the streets of Enmise, I had never entered the town. The result was that the innkeeper with whom we were connected, seeing that we would no longer come to him, was forced to come to us, and had established a branch to his inn on the road from Bellegarde to Beaucaire, at the sign of the Pont du Gard. We had thus at Aigues-Mortes, Martigues, or Bouc, a dozen places where we left our goods, and where, in case of necessity, we concealed ourselves from the gendarmes and custom-house officers. Smuggling is a profitable trade, when a certain degree of vigor and intelligence is employed. As for myself, brought up in the mountains, I had a double motive for fearing the gendarmes and custom-house officers, as my appearance before the judges would cause an inquiry, and an inquiry always looks back into the past. And in my past life, they might find something far more grave than the selling of smuggled cigars, or barrels of brandy without a permit. So, preferring death to capture, I accomplished the most astonishing deeds, and which, more than once, showed me that the too great care we take of our bodies is the only obstacle to the success of those projects which require rapid decision, and vigorous and determined execution. In reality, when you have once devoted your life to your enterprises, you are no longer the equal of other men, or rather, other men are no longer your equals, and whosoever has taken this resolution feels his strength and resources doubled. Philosophy, M. Bertuccio interrupted the Count. You have done a little of everything in your life. Oh, Excellency! No, no, but philosophy at 10:30 at night is somewhat late, yet I have no other observation to make, for what you say is correct, which is more than can be said for all philosophy. My journeys became more and more extensive and more productive. Assunta took care of all, and our little fortune increased. One day as I was setting off on an expedition, "Go," said she. "At your return I will give you a surprise." I questioned her, but in vain. She would tell me nothing, and I departed. Our expedition lasted nearly 6 weeks. We had been to Lucca to take in oil, to Leghorn for English cottons, and we ran our cargo without opposition, and returned home full of joy. When I entered the house, the first thing I beheld in the middle of Assunta's chamber was a cradle that might be called sumptuous compared with the rest of the furniture, and in it a baby 7 or 8 months old. I uttered a cry of joy. The only moments of sadness I had known since the assassination of the procureur were caused by the recollection that I had abandoned this child. For the assassination itself, I had never felt any remorse. Poor Assunta had guessed all. She had profited by my absence and furnished with the half of the linen, and having written down the day and hour at which I had deposited the child at the asylum, had set off for Paris, and had reclaimed it. No objection was raised, and the infant was given up to her. Ah, I confess, Your Excellency, when I saw this poor creature sleeping peacefully in its cradle, I felt my eyes filled with tears. Ah, Assunta, cried I, you are an excellent woman, and heaven will bless you. This, said Monte Cristo, is less correct than your philosophy, it is only faith. Alas, Your Excellency is right, replied Bertuccio, and God made this infant the instrument of our punishment. Never did a perverse nature declare itself more prematurely, and yet it was not owing to any fault in his bringing up. He was a most lovely child with large blue eyes of that deep color that harmonizes so well with the blonde complexion. Only his hair, which was too light, gave his face a most singular expression, and added to the vivacity of his look and the malice of his smile. Unfortunately, there is a proverb which says that red is either altogether good or altogether bad. The proverb was but too correct as regarded Benedetto, and even in his infancy he manifested the worst disposition. It is true that the indulgence of his foster mother encouraged him. This child, for whom my poor sister would go to the town, 5 or 6 leagues off, to purchase the earliest fruits and the most tempting sweetmeats, preferred to Palma grapes or Genoese preserves, the chestnuts stolen from a neighbor's orchard, or the dried apples in his loft, when he could eat as well of the nuts and apples that grew in my garden. One day, when Benedetto was about 5 or 6, our neighbor Wasilio, who, according to the custom of the country, never locked up his purse or his valuables for, as Your Excellency knows, there are no thieves in Corsica, complained that he had lost a louis out of his purse. We thought he must have made a mistake in counting his money, but he persisted in the accuracy of his statement. One day, Benedetto, who had been gone from the house since morning to our great anxiety, did not return until late in the evening, dragging a monkey after him, which he said he had found chained to the foot of a tree. For more than a month past, the mischievous child, who knew not what to wish for, had taken it into his head to have a monkey. A boatman who had passed by Rogliano, and who had several of these animals whose tricks had greatly diverted him, had doubtless suggested this idea to him. "Monkeys are not found in our woods chained to trees," said I. "Confess how you obtained this animal." Benedetto maintained the truth of what he had said, and accompanied it with details that did more honor to his imagination than to his veracity. I became angry. He began to laugh. I threatened to strike him, and he made 2 steps backwards. "You cannot beat me," said he. "You have no right, for you are not my father." We never knew who had revealed this fatal secret, which we had so carefully concealed from him. However, it was this answer, in which the child's whole character revealed itself, that almost terrified me, and my arm fell without touching him. The boy triumphed, and this victory rendered him so audacious that all the money of Assunta, whose affection for him seemed to increase as he became more unworthy of it, was spent in caprices she knew not how to contend against, and follies she had not the courage to prevent. When I was at Rogliano, everything went on properly, but no sooner was my back turned than Benedetto became master, and everything went ill. When he was only 11, he chose his companions from among the young men of 18 or 20, the worst characters in Bastia, or, indeed, in Corsica, and they had already, for some mischievous pranks, been several times threatened with a prosecution. I became alarmed, as any prosecution might be attended with serious consequences. I was compelled, at this period, to leave Corsica on an important expedition. I reflected for a long time, and with the hope of averting some impending misfortune, I resolved that Benedetto should accompany me. I hoped that the active and laborious life of a smuggler, with the severe discipline on board, would have a salutary effect on his character, which was now well nigh, if not quite, corrupt. I spoke to Benedetto alone, and proposed to him to accompany me, endeavoring to tempt him by all the promises most likely to dazzle the imagination of a child of 12. He heard me patiently, and when I had finished, burst out laughing. "Are you mad, uncle?" He called me by this name when he was in good humor. "Do you think I am going to change the life I lead for your mode of existence, my agreeable indolence for the hard and precarious toil you impose on yourself, exposed to the bitter frost at night, and the scorching heat by day, compelled to conceal yourself, and when you are perceived, receive a volley of bullets, all to earn a paltry sum? Why, I have as much money as I want. Mother Assunta always furnishes me when I ask for it. You see that I should be a fool to accept your offer." The arguments and his audacity perfectly stupefied me. Benedetto rejoined his associates, and I saw him from a distance point me out to them as a fool. "Sweet child," murmured Monte Cristo. "Oh, had he been my own son," replied Bertuccio, "or even my nephew, I would have brought him back to the right road, for the knowledge that you are doing your duty gives you strength. But the idea that I was striking a child whose father I had killed made it impossible for me to punish him. I gave my sister, who constantly defended the unfortunate boy, good advice, and as she confessed that she had several times missed money to a considerable amount, I showed her a safe place in which to conceal our little treasure for the future. My mind was already made up. Benedetto could read, write, and cipher perfectly, for when the fit seized him, he learned more in a day than others in a week. My intention was to enter him as a clerk in some ship, and without letting him know anything of my plan, to convey him some morning on board. By this means, his future treatment would depend upon his own conduct. I set off for France, after having fixed upon the plan. Our cargo was to be landed in the Gulf of Lyons, and this was a difficult thing to do, because it was then the year 1829. The most perfect tranquility was restored, and the vigilance of the custom-house officers was redoubled, and their strictness was increased at this time, in consequence of the fair at Beaucaire. Our expedition made a favorable beginning. We anchored our vessel, which had a double hold. where our goods were concealed amidst a number of other vessels that bordered the banks of the Rhne from Beaucaire to Arles. On our arrival, we began to discharge our cargo in the night, and to convey it into the town, by the help of the innkeeper with whom we were connected. Whether success rendered us imprudent, or whether we were betrayed, I know not. But one evening, about 5 o'clock, our little cabin boy came breathlessly to inform us that he had seen a detachment of custom-house officers advancing in our direction. It was not their proximity that alarmed us, for detachments were constantly patrolling along the banks of the Rhne, but the care, according to the boy's account, that they took to avoid being seen. In an instant we were on the alert, but it was too late. Our vessel was surrounded, and amongst the custom-house officers I observed several gendarmes, and as terrified at the sight of their uniforms as I was brave at the sight of any other. I sprang into the hold, opened a port, and dropped into the river, dived, and only rose at intervals to breathe, until I reached a ditch that had recently been made from the Rhne to the canal that runs from Beaucaire to Aigues-Mortes. I was now safe, for I could swim along the ditch without being seen, and I reached the canal in safety. I had designedly taken this direction. I have already told your Excellency of an innkeeper from Enmise who had set up a little tavern on the road from Bellegarde to Beaucaire. Yes, said Monte Cristo, I perfectly recollect him. I think he was your colleague. Precisely, answered Bertuccio, but he had, 7 or 8 years before this period, sold his establishment to a tailor at Marseille, who, having almost ruined himself in his old trade, wished to make his fortune in another. Of course, we made the same arrangements with the new landlord that we had with the old, and it was of this man that I intended to ask shelter. What was his name? Inquired the Count, who seemed to become somewhat interested in Bertuccio's story. Gaspard Cadraus. He had married a woman from the village of Carcant, and whom we did not know by any other name than that of her village. She was suffering from malarial fever, and seemed dying by inches. As for her husband, he was a strapping fellow of 40 or 45, who had more than once, in time of danger, given ample proof of his presence of mind and courage. And you say, interrupted Monte Cristo, that this took place towards the year 1829, your Excellency. In what month? June, the beginning or the end, the evening of the 3rd. Ah, said Monte Cristo, the evening of the 3rd of June, 1829. Go on. It was from Cadraus that I intended demanding shelter, and, as we never entered by the door that opened onto the road, I resolved not to break through the rule, so climbing over the garden hedge, I crept amongst the olive and wild fig trees, and fearing that Cadraus might have some guest, I entered a kind of shed in which I had often passed the night, and which was only separated from the inn by a partition, in which holes had been made in order to enable us to watch an opportunity of announcing our presence. My intention was, if Cadraus was alone, to acquaint him with my presence, finish the meal the custom-house officers had interrupted, and profit by the threatened storm to return to the Rhne and ascertain the state of our vessel and its crew. I stepped into the shed, and it was fortunate I did so, for at that moment Cadraus entered with a stranger. I waited patiently, not to overhear what they said, but because I could do nothing else. Besides, the same thing had occurred often before. The man who was with Cadraus was evidently a stranger to the south of France. He was one of those merchants who come to sell jewelry at the Beaucaire fair, and who, during the month the fair lasts, and during which there is so great an influx of merchants and customers from all parts of Europe, often have dealings to the amount of 100,000 to 150,000 francs. Cadraus entered hastily. Then, seeing that the room was, as usual, empty and only guarded by the dog, he called to his wife. "Hello, Carcant," said he, "the worthy priest has not deceived us. The diamond is real." An exclamation of joy was heard, and the staircase creaked beneath a feeble step. "What do you say?" asked his wife, pale as death. "I say that the diamond is real, and that this gentleman, one of the first jewelers of Paris, will give us 50,000 francs for it. Only, in order to satisfy himself that it really belongs to us, he wishes you to relate to him, as I have done already, the miraculous manner in which the diamond came into our possession. In the meantime, please to sit down, monsieur, and I will fetch you some refreshment." The jeweler examined attentively the interior of the inn and the apparent poverty of the persons, who were about to sell him a diamond that seemed to have come from the casket of a prince. "Relate your story, madame," said he, wishing, no doubt, to profit by the absence of the husband, so that the latter could not influence the wife's story to see if the two recitals tallied. "Oh," returned she, "it was a gift of heaven. My husband was a great friend in 1814 or 1815 of a sailor named Edmond Dantès. This poor fellow, whom Cadraus had not forgotten him, and at his death he bequeathed this diamond to him. But how did he obtain it?" asked the jeweler. "Had he it before he was imprisoned?" "No, monsieur, but it appears that in prison he made the acquaintance of a rich Englishman, and as in prison he fell sick, and Dantès took the same care of him as if he had been his brother. The Englishman, when he was set free, gave this stone to Dantès, who, less fortunate, died and in his turn left it to us, and charged the excellent abbé who was here this morning to deliver it." "The same story," muttered the jeweler, "and improbable as it seemed at first, it may be true. There's only the price we are not agreed about." "How not agreed about?" said Cadraus. "I thought we agreed for the price I asked." "That is," replied the jeweler, "I offered 40,000 francs." 40,000, cried La Carconte. "We will not part with it for that sum. The abbé told us it was worth 50,000 without the setting." "What was the abbé's name?" asked the indefatigable questioner. "The Abbé Busoni," said La Carconte. "He was a foreigner." "An Italian from the neighborhood of Mantua, I believe." "Let me see this diamond again," replied the jeweler. "The first time you are often mistaken as to the value of a stone." Cadraus took from his pocket a small case of black shagreen, opened, and gave it to the jeweler. At the sight of the diamond, which was as large as a hazelnut, La Carconte's eyes sparkled with cupidity. "And what did you think of this fine story, eavesdropper?" said Monte Cristo. "Did you credit it?" "Yes, your excellency. I did not look on Cadraus as a bad man, and I thought him incapable of committing a crime or even a theft. That did more honor to your heart than to your experience, M. Bertuccio. Had you known this Edmond Dantès of whom they spoke?" "No, your excellency, I had never heard of him before, and never but once afterwards, and that was from the Abbé Busoni himself, when I saw him in the prison at Nice." "Go on." The jeweler took the ring, and drawing from his pocket a pair of steel pliers and a small set of copper scales, he took the stone out of its setting and weighed it carefully. "I will give you 45,000, said he, but not a sou more. Besides, as that is the exact value of the stone, I brought just that sum with me." "Oh, that's no matter," replied Cadraus. "I will go back with you to fetch the other 5,000 francs. "No," returned the jeweler, giving back the diamond and the ring to Cadraus. "No, it is worth no more, and I am sorry I offered so much, for the stone has a flaw in it which I had not seen. However, I will not go back on my word, and I will give 45,000. "At least, replace the diamond in the ring," said La Carconte sharply. "Ah, true," replied the jeweler, and he reset the stone. "No matter," observed Cadraus, replacing the box in his pocket, "someone else will purchase it." "Yes," continued the jeweler, "but someone else will not be so easy as I am, or content himself with the same story. It is not natural that a man like you should possess such a diamond. He will inform against you. You will have to find the Abbé Busoni. And abbess who give diamonds worth 2,000 louis are rare. The law would seize it and put you in prison. If at the end of 3 or 4 months you are set at liberty, the ring will be lost, or a false stone, worth 3 francs, will be given you, instead of a diamond worth 50,000 or perhaps 55,000 francs, from which you must allow that one runs considerable risk in purchasing. Kadrouse and his wife looked eagerly at each other. "No," said Kadrouse, "we are not rich enough to lose 5,000 francs. "As you please, my dear sir," said the jeweler. "I had, however, as you see, brought you the money in bright coin." And he drew from his pocket a handful of gold, and held it sparkling before the dazzled eyes of the innkeeper, and in the other hand he held a packet of banknotes. There was evidently a severe struggle in the mind of Kadrouse. It was plain that the small shagreen case, which he turned over and over in his hand, did not seem to him commensurate in value to the enormous sum which fascinated his gaze. He turned towards his wife. "What do you think of this?" he asked in a low voice. "Let him have it," she said. "If he returns to Beaucaire without the diamond, he will inform against us, and, as he says, who knows if we shall ever again see the Abbé Busoni? In all probability we shall never see him." "Well then, so I will," said Kadrouse, "so you may have the diamond for 45,000 francs. But my wife wants a gold chain, and I want a pair of silver buckles." The jeweler drew from his pocket a long flat box, which contained several samples of the articles demanded. "Here," he said, "I am very straightforward in my dealings, take your choice." The woman selected a gold chain worth about 5 louis, and the husband a pair of buckles, worth perhaps 15 francs. "I hope you will not complain now," said the jeweler. "The Abbé told me it was worth 50,000 francs, muttered Kadrouse. Come, give it to me." "What a strange fellow you are," said the jeweler, taking the diamond from his hand. "I give you 45,000 francs, that is, 2,500 livres of income, a fortune such as I wish I had myself, and you are not satisfied." "And the 45,000 francs," inquired Kadrouse in a hoarse voice, "where are they? Come, let us see them." "Here they are," replied the jeweler, and he counted out upon the table 15,000 francs in gold and 30,000 francs in banknotes. "Wait whilst I light the lamp," said La Carconte. "It is growing dark, and there may be some mistake." In fact, night had come on during this conversation, and with night the storm which had been threatening for the last half-hour. The thunder growled in the distance, but it was apparently not heard by the jeweler, Kadrouse, or La Carconte, absorbed as they were all three with the demon of gain. I myself felt a strange kind of fascination at the sight of all this gold and all these banknotes. It seemed to me that I was in a dream, and, as it always happens in a dream, I felt myself riveted to the spot. Kadrouse counted and again counted the gold and the notes, then handed them to his wife, who counted and counted them again in her turn. During this time, the jeweler made the diamond play and sparkle in the lamplight, and the gem threw out jets of light which made him unmindful of those which precursors of the storm began to play in at the windows. "Well," inquired the jeweler, "is the cash all right?" "Yes," said Kadrouse. "Give me the pocketbook, La Carconte, and find a bag somewhere." La Carconte went to a cupboard and returned with an old leathern pocketbook and a bag. From the former she took some greasy letters and put in their place the banknotes, and from the bag took 2 or 3 crowns of 6 livres each, which, in all probability, formed the entire fortune of the miserable couple. "There," said Kadrouse, "and now, although you have wronged us of perhaps 10,000 francs, will you have your supper with us? I invite you with good will." "Thank you," replied the jeweler, "it must be getting late, and I must return to Beaucaire. My wife will be getting uneasy." He drew out his watch and exclaimed, "Morbleu! Nearly 9 o'clock, why, I shall not get back to Beaucaire before midnight. Good night, my friends. If the Abbé Busoni should by any accident return, think of me. In another week you will have left Beaucaire," remarked Kadrouse, "for the fair ends in a few days." "True, but that makes no difference. Write to me at Paris, to M. Joannes in the Palais Royal, Arcade Pier, No. 45. I will make the journey on purpose to see him if it is worth while." At this moment there was a tremendous clap of thunder, accompanied by a flash of lightning so vivid that it quite eclipsed the light of the lamp. "See here," exclaimed Kadrouse, "you cannot think of going out in such weather as this." "Oh, I am not afraid of thunder," said the jeweler. "And then there are robbers," said La Carconte. "The road is never very safe during fair time." "Oh, as to the robbers," said Joannes, "here is something for them," and he drew from his pocket a pair of small pistols, loaded to the muzzle. "Here," said he, "are dogs who bark and bite at the same time. They are for the two first who shall have a longing for your diamond, friend Kadrouse." Kadrouse and his wife again interchanged a meaning look. It seemed as though they were both inspired at the same time with some horrible thought. "Well then, a good journey to you," said Kadrouse. "Thanks," replied the jeweler. He then took his cane, which he had placed against an old cupboard, and went out. At the moment when he opened the door, such a gust of wind came in that the lamp was nearly extinguished. "Oh," said he, "this is very nice weather, and 2 legs to go in such a storm." "Remain," said Kadrouse. "You can sleep here." "Yes, do stay," added La Carconte in a tremulous voice. "We will take every care of you. No, I must sleep at Beaucaire. So once more, good night." Kadrouse followed him slowly to the threshold. "I can see neither heaven nor earth," said the jeweler, who was outside the door. "Do I turn to the right or to the left hand?" "To the right," said Kadrouse. "You cannot go wrong, the road is bordered by trees on both sides." "Good, all right," said a voice almost lost in the distance. "Close the door," said La Carconte. "I do not like open doors when it thunders, particularly when there is money in the house." Answered Kadrouse, double-locking the door. He came into the room, went to the cupboard, took out the bag and pocketbook, and both began, for the 3rd time, to count their gold and bank notes. I never saw such an expression of cupidity as the flickering lamp revealed in those 2 countenances. The woman, especially, was hideous. Her usual feverish tremulousness was intensified, her countenance had become livid, and her eyes resembled burning coals. "Why," she inquired in a hoarse voice, "did you invite him to sleep here tonight?" "Why?" said Kadrouse with a shudder. "Why, that he might not have the trouble of returning to Beaucaire." "Ah," responded the woman with an expression impossible to describe, "I thought it was for something else." "Woman, why do you have such ideas?" cried Kadrouse, "or, if you have them, why don't you keep them to yourself?" "Well," said La Carconte, after a moment's pause, "you are not a man." "What do you mean?" added Kadrouse. "If you had been a man, you would not have let him go from here." "Woman." "Or else he should not have reached Beaucaire." "Woman." "The road takes a turn, he is obliged to follow it, while alongside of the canal there is a shorter road." "Woman, you offend the good God. There, listen." And at this moment there was a tremendous peal of thunder, while the livid lightning illumined the room, and the thunder, rolling away in the distance, seemed to withdraw unwillingly from the cursed abode. "Mercy," said Kadrouse, crossing himself. At the same moment, and in the midst of the terrifying silence which usually follows a clap of thunder, they heard a knocking at the door. Kadrouse and his wife started and looked aghast at each other. "Who's there?" cried Kadrouse, rising and drawing up in a heap the gold and notes scattered over the table, and which he covered with his 2 hands. "It is I," shouted a voice. "And who are you?" "Part of you, Joannes the jeweler." "Well, and you said I offended the good God," said La Carconte with a horrid smile. "Why, the good God sends him back again." Kadrouse sank pale and breathless into his chair. La Carconte, on the contrary, rose, and going with a firm step towards the door, opened it, saying as she did so, "Come in, dear M." "Joannes." "Ma foi," said the jeweler, drenched with rain, "I am not destined to return to Beaucaire tonight. The shortest follies are best, my dear Kadrouse. You offered me hospitality, and I accept it, and have returned to sleep beneath your friendly roof." Kadrouse stammered out something, while he wiped away the sweat that started to his brow. La Carconte double-locked the door behind the jeweler.
Chapter 45.
As the jeweler returned to the apartment, He cast around him a scrutinizing glance, but there was nothing to excite suspicion, if it did not exist, or to confirm it, if it were already awakened. Caedrouse's hand still grasped the gold and banknotes, and La Carconte called up her sweetest smiles while welcoming the reappearance of their guest. "Well, well," said the jeweler, "you seem, my good friends, to have had some fears respecting the accuracy of your money, by counting it over so carefully directly I was gone." "Oh no," answered Caedrouse, "that was not my reason, I can assure you. But the circumstances by which we have become possessed of this wealth are so unexpected, as to make us scarcely credit our good fortune, and it is only by placing the actual proof of our riches before our eyes that we can persuade ourselves that the whole affair is not a dream." The jeweler smiled. "Have you any other guests in your house?" inquired he. "Nobody but ourselves," replied Caedrouse. "The fact is, we do not lodge travelers. Indeed, our tavern is so near the town that nobody would think of stopping here. Then I am afraid I shall very much inconvenience you." "Inconvenience us?" "Not at all, my dear sir," said La Carconte in her most gracious manner. "Not at all, I assure you. But where will you manage to stow me?" "In the chamber overhead. Surely that is where you yourselves sleep." "Never mind that, we have a second bed in the adjoining room." Caedrouse stared at his wife with much astonishment. The jeweler, meanwhile, was humming a song as he stood warming his back at the fire La Carconte had kindled to dry the wet garments of her guest. And this done, she next occupied herself in arranging his supper, by spreading a napkin at the end of the table, and placing on it the slender remains of their dinner, to which she added 3 or 4 fresh-laid eggs. Caedrouse had once more parted with his treasure. The banknotes were replaced in the pocketbook, the gold put back into the bag, and the whole carefully locked in the cupboard. He then began packing the room with a pensive and gloomy air, glancing from time to time at the jeweler, who stood reeking with the steam from his wet clothes, and merely changing his place on the warm hearth to enable the whole of his garments to be dried. "There," said La Carconte, as she placed a bottle of wine on the table, "supper is ready whenever you are." "And you?" asked Joannes. "I don't want any supper," said Caedrouse. "We dined so very late," hastily interposed La Carconte. "Then it seems I am to eat alone," remarked the jeweler. "Oh, we shall have the pleasure of waiting upon you," answered La Carconte. With an eager attention she was not accustomed to manifest even to guests who paid for what they took. From time to time Caedrouse darted on his wife keen, searching glances, but rapid as the lightning flash. The storm still continued. There," said La Carconte, "do you hear that? Upon my word you did well to come back." "Nevertheless," replied the jeweler, "if by the time I have finished my supper the tempest has at all abated, I shall make another start." "It's the mistral," said Caedrouse, "and it will be sure to last till tomorrow morning." He sighed heavily. "Well," said the jeweler as he placed himself at table, "all I can say is, so much the worse for those who are abroad." "Yes," chimed in La Carconte, "they will have a wretched night of it." The jeweler began eating his supper, and the woman, who was ordinarily so querulous and indifferent to all who approached her, was suddenly transformed into the most smiling and attentive hostess. Had the unhappy man on whom she lavished her assiduities been previously acquainted with her, so sudden an alteration might well have excited suspicion in his mind, or at least have greatly astonished him. Caedrouse, meanwhile, continued to pace the room in gloomy silence, sedulously avoiding the sight of his guest. But as soon as the stranger had completed his repast, the agitated innkeeper went eagerly to the door and opened it. "I believe the storm is over," said he. But as if to contradict his statement, at that instant, a violent clap of thunder seemed to shake the house to its very foundation, while a sudden gust of wind, mingled with rain, extinguished the lamp he held in his hand. Trembling and awestruck, Caedrouse hastily shut the door and returned to his guest, while La Carconte lighted a candle by the smoldering ashes that glimmered on the hearth. "You must be tired," said she to the jeweler. I have spread a pair of white sheets on your bed. Go up when you are ready and sleep well." Joanne stayed for a while to see whether the storm seemed to abate in its fury, but a brief space of time sufficed to assure him that, instead of diminishing, the violence of the rain and thunder momentarily increased. Resigning himself, therefore, to what seemed inevitable, he bade his host good night and mounted the stairs. He passed over my head, and I heard the flooring creak beneath his footsteps. The quick, eager glance of La Carconte followed him as he ascended, while Caedros, on the contrary, turned his back and seemed most anxiously to avoid even glancing at him. All these circumstances did not strike me as painfully at the time as they have since done. In fact, all that had happened, with the exception of the story of the diamond, which certainly did wear an air of improbability, appeared natural enough and called for neither apprehension nor mistrust. But worn out as I was with fatigue, and fully purposing to proceed onwards directly the tempest abated, I determined to obtain a few hours' sleep. Overhead I could accurately distinguish every movement of the jeweler, who, after making the best arrangements in his power for passing a comfortable night, threw himself on his bed, and I could hear it creak and groan beneath his weight. Insensibly my eyelids grew heavy, deep sleep stole over me, and having no suspicion of anything wrong, I sought not to shake it off. I looked into the kitchen once more and saw Caedros sitting by the side of a long table upon one of the low wooden stools which in country places are frequently used instead of chairs. His back was turned towards me, so that I could not see the expression of his countenance, neither should I have been able to do so had he been placed differently, as his head was buried between his two hands. La Carconte continued to gaze on him for some time, then shrugging her shoulders, she took her seat immediately opposite to him. At this moment the expiring embers threw up a fresh flame from the kindling of a piece of wood that lay near, and a bright light flashed over the room. La Carconte still kept her eyes fixed on her husband, but as he made no sign of changing his position, she extended her hard, bony hand and touched him on the forehead. Caedros shuddered. The woman's lips seemed to move as though she were talking, but because she merely spoke in an undertone or my senses were dulled by sleep, I did not catch a word she uttered. Confused sights and sounds seemed to float before me, and gradually I fell into a deep, heavy slumber. How long I had been in this unconscious state I know not, when I was suddenly aroused by the report of a pistol, followed by a fearful cry. Weak and tottering footsteps resounded across the chamber above me, and the next instant a dull, heavy weight seemed to fall powerless on the staircase. I had not yet fully recovered consciousness, when again I heard groans, mingled with half-stifled cries, as if from persons engaged in a deadly struggle. A cry more prolonged than the others and ending in a series of groans effectually roused me from my drowsy lethargy. Hastily raising myself on one arm, I looked around, but all was dark, and it seemed to me as if the rain must have penetrated through the flooring of the room above, for some kind of moisture appeared to fall, drop by drop, upon my forehead, and when I passed my hand across my brow, I felt that it was wet and clammy. To the fearful noises that had awakened me had succeeded the most perfect silence unbroken, save by the footsteps of a man walking about in the chamber above. The staircase creaked. He descended into the room below, approached the fire and lit a candle. The man was Caedros. He was pale and his shirt was all bloody. Having obtained the light, he hurried upstairs again, and once more I heard his rapid and uneasy footsteps. A moment later he came down again, holding in his hand the small shagreen case, which he opened to assure himself it contained the diamond, seemed to hesitate as to which pocket he should put it in. Then, as if dissatisfied with the security of either pocket, he deposited it in his red handkerchief, which he carefully rolled round his head. After this he took from his cupboard the banknotes and gold he had put there, thrust the one into the pocket of his trousers, and the other into that of his waistcoat, hastily tied up a small bundle of linen, and rushing towards the door, disappeared in the darkness of the night. Then all became clear and manifest to me, and I reproached myself with what had happened, as though I myself had done the guilty deed. I fancied that I still heard faint moans, and imagining that the unfortunate jeweler might not be quite dead, I determined to go to his relief, by way of atoning in some slight degree, not for the crime I had committed, but for that which I had not endeavored to prevent. For this purpose, I applied all the strength I possessed to force an entrance from the cramped spot in which I lay to the adjoining room. The poorly fastened boards which alone divided me from it yielded to my efforts, and I found myself in the house. Hastily snatching up the lighted candle, I hurried to the staircase. About midway, a body was lying quite across the stairs. It was that of La Carconte. The pistol I had heard had doubtless been fired at her. The shot had frightfully lacerated her throat, leaving 2 gaping wounds from which, as well as the mouth, the blood was pouring in floods. She was stone dead. I strode past her and ascended to the sleeping chamber, which presented an appearance of the wildest disorder. The furniture had been knocked over in the deadly struggle that had taken place there, and the sheets, to which the unfortunate jeweler had doubtless clung, were dragged across the room. The murdered man lay on the floor, his head leaning against the wall, and about him was a pool of blood which poured forth from 3 large wounds in his breast. There was a 4th gash, in which a long table knife was plunged up to the handle. I stumbled over some object. I stooped to examine it. Was the 2nd pistol, which had not gone off, probably from the powder being wet. I approached the jeweler, who was not quite dead, and at the sound of my footsteps and the creaking of the floor, he opened his eyes, fixed them on me with an anxious and inquiring gaze, moved his lips as though trying to speak, then, overcome by the effort, fell back and expired. This appalling sight almost bereft me of my senses, and finding that I could no longer be of service to anyone in the house, my only desire was to fly. I rushed towards the staircase, clutching my hair and uttering a groan of horror. Upon reaching the room below, I found 5 or 6 custom-house officers and 2 or 3 gendarmes, all heavily armed. They threw themselves upon me. I made no resistance. I was no longer master of my senses. When I strove to speak, a few inarticulate sounds alone escaped my lips. As I noticed the significant manner in which the whole party pointed to my blood-stained garments, I involuntarily surveyed myself, and then I discovered that the thick warm drops that had so bedewed me as I lay beneath the staircase must have been the blood of La Carconte. I pointed to the spot where I had concealed myself. "What does he mean?" asked a gendarme. One of the officers went to the place I directed. "He means," replied the man upon his return, "that he got in that way, and he showed the hole I had made when I broke through. Then I saw that they took me for the assassin." I recovered force and energy enough to free myself from the hands of those who held me, while I managed to stammer forth, "I did not do it. Indeed, I did not." A couple of gendarmes held the muzzles of their carbines against my breast. "Stir but a step," said they, "and you are a dead man." "Why should you threaten me with death," cried I, "when I have already declared my innocence?" "Tush, tush," cried the men, "keep your innocent stories to tell to the judge at Nimes. Meanwhile, come along with us, and the best advice we can give you is to do so unresistingly." Alas, resistance was far from my thoughts. I was utterly overpowered by surprise and terror, and without a word I suffered myself to be handcuffed and tied to a horse's tail, and thus they took me to Nimes. I had been tracked by a customs officer, who had lost sight of me near the tavern. Feeling certain that I intended to pass the night there, he had returned to summon his comrades, who just arrived in time to hear the report of the pistol, and to take me in the midst of such circumstantial proofs of my guilt as rendered all hopes of proving my innocence utterly futile. One only chance was left me, that of beseeching the magistrate before whom I was taken to cause every inquiry to be made for the Abbé Busoni, who had stopped at the inn of the Pont du Gard on that morning. If Cadros had invented the story relative to the diamond, and there existed no such person as the Abbé Busoni, then, indeed, I was lost past redemption, or, at least, my life hung upon the feeble chance of Cadros himself being apprehended and confessing the whole truth. 2 months passed away in hopeless expectation on my part, while I must do the magistrate the justice to say that he used every means to obtain information of the person I declared could exculpate me if he would. Cadros still evaded all pursuit, and I had resigned myself to what seemed my inevitable fate. My trial was to come on at the approaching assizes, when, on the 8th of September, that is to say, precisely 3 months and 5 days after the events which had periled my life, the Abbé Busoni, whom I never ventured to believe I should see, presented himself at the prison doors, saying he understood one of the prisoners wished to speak to him. He added that having learned at Marseille the particulars of my imprisonment, he hastened to comply with my desire. You may easily imagine with what eagerness I welcomed him, and how minutely I related the whole of what I had seen and heard. I felt some degree of nervousness as I entered upon the history of the diamond, but to my inexpressible astonishment, he confirmed it in every particular, and to my equal surprise, he seemed to place entire belief in all I said. And then it was that, won by his mild charity, seeing that he was acquainted with all the habits and customs of my own country, and considering also that pardon for the only crime of which I was really guilty might come with a double power from lips so benevolent and kind, I besought him to receive my confession, under the seal of which I recounted the Audiobook affair in all its details, as well as every other transaction of my life. That which I had done by the impulse of my best feelings produced the same effect as though it had been the result of calculation. My voluntary confession of the assassination at Audiobook proved to him that I had not committed that of which I stood accused. When he quitted me, he bade me be of good courage, and to rely upon his doing all in his power to convince my judges of my innocence. I had speedy proofs that the excellent Abb was engaged in my behalf, for the rigors of my imprisonment were alleviated by many trifling though acceptable indulgences, and I was told that my trial was to be postponed to the assizes following those now being held. In the interim, it pleased Providence to cause the apprehension of Cadros, who was discovered in some distant country, and brought back to France, where he made a full confession, refusing to make the fact of his wife's having suggested and arranged the murder any excuse for his own guilt. The wretched man was sentenced to the galleys for life, and I was immediately set at liberty. And then it was, I presume, said Monte Cristo that you came to me as the bearer of a letter from the Abbé Busoni. It was, Your Excellency. The benevolent Abb took an evident interest in all that concerned me. Your mode of life as a smuggler, said he to me one day, will be the ruin of you. If you get out, Dantès take it up again. But how, inquired I, am I to maintain myself and my poor sister? A person whose confessor I am, replied he, and who entertains a high regard for me, applied to me a short time since to procure him a confidential servant. Would you like such a post? If so, I will give you a letter of introduction to him. Oh, Father, I exclaimed, you are very good, but you must swear solemnly that I shall never have reason to repent my recommendation. I extended my hand, and was about to pledge myself by any promise he would dictate, but he stopped me. It is unnecessary for you to bind yourself by any vow, said he. I know and admire the Corsican nature too well to fear you. Here, take this, continued he, after rapidly writing the few lines I brought to your Excellency, and upon receipt of which you deign to receive me into your service, and proudly I ask whether your Excellency has ever had cause to repent having done so. No, replied the Count, I take pleasure in saying that you have served me faithfully, Bertuccio, but you might have shown more confidence in me. I, your Excellency? Yes, you. How comes it that having both a sister and an adopted son, you have never spoken to me of either? Alas, I have still to recount the most distressing period of my life. Anxious as you may suppose I was to behold and comfort my dear sister, I lost no time in hastening to Corsica. But when I arrived at Rogliano, I found a house of mourning, the consequences of a scene so horrible that the neighbors remember and speak of it to this day. Acting by my advice, my poor sister had refused to comply with the unreasonable demands of Benedetto, who was continually tormenting her for money, as long as he believed there was a sou left in her possession. One morning he threatened her with the severest consequences if she did not supply him with what he desired, and disappeared and remained away all day, leaving the kind-hearted Assunta, who loved him as if he were her own child, to weep over his conduct and bewail his absence. Evening came, and still, with all the patient solicitude of a mother, she watched for his return. As the 11th hour struck, he entered with a swaggering air, attended by two of the most dissolute and reckless of his boon companions. She stretched out her arms to him, but they seized hold of her, and one of the three, none other than the accursed Benedetto, exclaimed, "Put her to torture, and she'll soon tell us where her money is." It unfortunately happened that our neighbor, Wasilio, was at Bastia, leaving no person in his house but his wife. No human creature beside could hear or see anything that took place within our dwelling. Two held poor Assunta, who, unable to conceive that any harm was intended to her, smiled in the face of those who were soon to become her executioners. The third proceeded to barricade the doors and windows, then returned, and the three united in stifling the cries of terror incited by the sight of these preparations, and then dragged Assunta feet foremost towards the brazier, expecting to wring from her an avowal of where her supposed treasure was secreted. In the struggle her clothes caught fire, and they were obliged to let go their hold in order to preserve themselves from sharing the same fate. Covered with flames, Assunta rushed wildly to the door, but it was fastened. She flew to the windows, but they were also secured. Then the neighbors heard frightful shrieks. It was Assunta calling for help. The cries died away in groans, and next morning, as soon as Wasilio's wife could muster up courage to venture abroad, she caused the door of our dwelling to be opened by the public authorities, when Assunta, although dreadfully burnt, was found still breathing. Every drawer and closet in the house had been forced open, and the money stolen. Benedetto never again appeared at Rogliano, neither have I since that day either seen or heard anything concerning him. It was subsequently to these dreadful events that I waited on your Excellency, to whom it would have been folly to have mentioned Benedetto, since all trace of him seemed entirely lost, or of my sister, since she was dead. And in what light did you view the occurrence? Inquired Monte Cristo. As a punishment for the crime I had committed, answered Bertuccio. Oh, those Villaforts are an accursed race. Truly they are, murmured the Count in a lugubrious tone. And now, resumed Bertuccio, your Excellency may, perhaps, be able to comprehend that this place, which I revisit for the first time, this garden, the actual scene of my crime, must have given rise to reflections of no very agreeable nature, and produced that gloom and depression of spirits which excited the notice of your Excellency, who was pleased to express a desire to know the cause. At this instant, a shudder passes over me as I reflect that possibly I am now standing on the very grave in which lies M. de Villefort, by whose hand the ground was dug to receive the corpse of his child. Everything is possible, said Monte Cristo, rising from the bench on which he had been sitting. Even, he added in an inaudible voice, even that the procureur be not dead. The Abbé Busoni did right to send you to me, he went on in his ordinary tone, and you have done well in relating to me the whole of your history, as it will prevent my forming any erroneous opinions concerning you in future. As for that Benedetto, who so grossly belied his name, have you never made any effort to trace out whither he has gone, or what has become of him? No, far from wishing to learn whither he has betaken himself, I should shun the possibility of meeting him as I would a wild beast. Thank God, I have never heard his name mentioned by any person, and I hope and believe he is dead." "Do not think so, Bertuccio," replied the Count, "for the wicked are not so easily disposed of, for God seems to have them under his special watch care to make of them instruments of his vengeance." "So be it," responded Bertuccio. "All I ask of heaven is that I may never see him again. And now, Your Excellency," he added, bowing his head, "you know everything. You are my judge on earth, as the Almighty is in heaven. Have you for me no words of consolation?" "My good friend, I can only repeat the words addressed to you by the Abbé Busoni. Villefort merited punishment for what he had done to you, and perhaps to others. Benedetto, if still living, will become the instrument of divine retribution in some way or other, and then be duly punished in his turn. As far as you yourself are concerned, I see but one point in which you are really guilty. Ask yourself, wherefore, after rescuing the infant from its living grave, you did not restore it to its mother. There was the crime, Bertuccio, that was where you became really culpable." "True, Excellency, that was the crime, the real crime, for in that I acted like a coward. My first duty, directly I had succeeded in recalling the babe to life, was to restore it to its mother. But in order to do so, I must have made close and careful inquiry, which would, in all probability, have led to my own apprehension. And I clung to life, partly on my sister S. account, and partly from that feeling of pride inborn in our hearts of desiring to come off untouched and victorious in the execution of our vengeance. Perhaps, too, the natural and instinctive love of life made me wish to avoid endangering my own. And then, again, I am not as brave and courageous as was my poor brother." Bertuccio hid his face in his hands as he uttered these words, while Monte Cristo fixed on him a look of inscrutable meaning. After a brief silence, rendered still more solemn by the time and place, the Count said, in a tone of melancholy wholly unlike his usual manner, "In order to bring this conversation to a fitting termination, the last we shall ever hold upon this subject, I will repeat to you some words I have heard from the lips of the Abbé Busoni. For all evils there are two remedies, time and silence. And now leave me, Monsieur Bertuccio, to walk alone here in the garden. The very circumstances which inflict on you, as a principal in the tragic scene enacted here, such painful emotions, are to me, on the contrary, a source of something like contentment, and serve but to enhance the value of this dwelling in my estimation. The chief beauty of trees consists in the deep shadow of their umbrageous boughs, while fancy pictures a moving multitude of shapes and forms flitting and passing beneath that shade. Here I have a garden laid out in such a way as to afford the fullest scope for the imagination, and furnished with thickly grown trees, beneath whose leafy screen a visionary like myself may conjure up phantoms at will. This to me, who expected but to find a blank enclosure surrounded by a straight wall, is, I assure you, a most agreeable surprise. I have no fear of ghosts, and I have never heard it said that so much harm had been done by the dead during 6,000 years as is wrought by the living in a single day. Retire within, Bertuccio, and tranquilize your mind. Should your confessor be less indulgent to you in your dying moments than you found the Abbé Busoni, send for me, if I am still on earth, and I will soothe your ears with words that shall effectually calm, and soothe your parting soul ere it goes forth to traverse the ocean called eternity." Bertuccio bowed respectfully and turned away, sighing heavily. Monte Cristo, left alone, took 3 or 4 steps onwards, and murmured, "Here, beneath this plane tree, must have been where the infant's grave was dug. There is the little door opening into the garden. At this corner is the private staircase communicating with the sleeping apartment. There will be no necessity for me to make a note of these particulars, for there, before my eyes, beneath my feet, all around me, I have the plan sketched with all the living reality of truth." After making the tour of the garden a second time, the Count re-entered his carriage, while Bertuccio, who perceived the thoughtful expression of his master's features, took his seat beside the driver without uttering a word. The carriage proceeded rapidly towards Paris. That same evening, upon reaching his abode in the Champs-Élysées, the Count of Monte Cristo went over the whole building with the air of one long acquainted with each nook or corner. Nor, although preceding the party, did he once mistake one door for another, or commit the smallest error when choosing any particular corridor or staircase to conduct him to a place or suite of rooms he desired to visit. Ali was his principal attendant during this nocturnal survey. Having given various orders to Bertuccio relative to the improvements and alterations he desired to make in the house, the Count, drawing out his watch, said to the attentive Nubian, "It is 11:30. Haydée will soon be here. Have the French attendants been summoned to await her coming?" Ali extended his hands towards the apartments destined for the fair Greek, which were so effectually concealed by means of a tapestried entrance, that it would have puzzled the most curious to have divined their existence. Ali, having pointed to the apartments, held up 3 fingers of his right hand, and then, placing it beneath his head, shut his eyes and feigned to sleep. "I understand," said Monte Cristo, well acquainted with Ali's pantomime. "You mean to tell me that 3 female attendants await their new mistress in her sleeping chamber?" Ali, with considerable animation, made a sign in the affirmative. "Madame will be tired tonight," continued Monte Cristo, "and will, no doubt, wish to rest. Desire the French attendants not to weary her with questions, but merely to pay their respectful duty and retire. You will also see that the Greek servants hold no communication with those of this country." He bowed. Just at that moment voices were heard hailing the concierge. The gate opened. A carriage rolled down the avenue and stopped at the steps. The Count hastily descended, presented himself at the already opened carriage door, and held out his hand to a young woman, completely enveloped in a green silk mantle heavily embroidered with gold. She raised the hand extended towards her to her lips, and kissed it with a mixture of love and respect. Some few words passed between them in that sonorous language in which Homer makes his gods converse. The young woman spoke with an expression of deep tenderness, while the Count replied with an air of gentle gravity. Preceded by Ali, who carried a rose-colored flambeau in his hand, the young lady, who was no other than the lovely Greek who had been Monte Cristo's companion in Italy, was conducted to her apartments, while the Count retired to the pavilion reserved for himself. In another hour, every light in the house was extinguished, and it might have been thought that all its inmates slept.
Will the weight of secrets shatter the soul, or will courage rise to meet the shadows? Can hope endure in a world cloaked in deception and despair? Discover the answers in next week's chapter. Join us Tuesday on Raining Book. Subscribe and tap the bell to follow every heart-pounding twist of fate and resilience. Tell us below, whose journey captivates you most? The steadfast hero forging a path through chaos, the enigmatic figure pulling strings from the shadows, or the quiet souls seeking light amidst darkness? Every like, comment, or share fuels our mission to bring stories as gripping and unforgettable as Dumas' masterpiece. Until then, keep your imagination alive for whispered plots and grand revelations. Happy listening.